his portrayal of Willy Wonka really isn't the best, and it's a Tim Burton film. There's the Disastrophe 2005 film, there's the... Wait, when did Atlantis SquarePants release again? Oh yay! I gotta add the 2005 film to the bunch too. That's not good. Comer to the movie scene, and this version- Okay dude, look, this is the worst version of Willy Wonka. I don't even know why I'm trying to sugarcoat it. And believe me, considering some of the actual factual crap that I've seen this franchise spit out. But honestly, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory 2005 is just a giant freaking cluster truck. The 2005 film is a better adaptation per se, but oh gosh, that film sucks as a whole. I don't even know where to begin with where this design fails, because this design fails everywhere. Like, I love Johnny Depp, he's one of my favorite actors, but the 2005 film is just awful. The absolute worst of these has to be 2005 Wonka. The very second the 2005 film released, the Willy Wonka franchise went down the drain. Insert obligatory, I like and respect Johnny Depp but hate this version of Wonka reference here, and we're good to go. For mostly worse, the 2005 film was advertised heavily during its heyday. Because this film seriously deserves its own dedicated video essay describing anything and everything terrible about it. Guys, my dudes, my bros, my homies, my beautiful brothers in arms, today is a monumentous occasion. Today not only roughly marks the 1-year anniversary of my very first Willy Wonka video, today, we rejoice on the eve of my channel's 5-year anniversary. Yes, you heard that correctly. My channel has been alive for 5 whole years. It was made on September 1st, 2018, and here we are, 2023, 5 years later. During my first years on YouTube, I didn't have much of a goal or identity. I just sort of made stupid meme videos, and because of that, I was actually halfway relevant. And now, here I am doing these Willy Wonka video essays and actually putting time and effort and care into my projects. And while my channel may be dead, that doesn't matter to me much. What matters is that you guys have been with me and stuck with me throughout the past 5 years. Throughout all the hiatuses and ups and downs, sticking with me through thick and thin, through grease and gristle. What matters is that my videos do get out there and do get attention, even if it's minuscule in the grand scheme of things. To the few hundreds who are still watching my channel, to the small audience who has stuck with me, thank you. Throughout the course of around a year, Willy Wonka, of all things, has done the impossible. It's made me feel hopeful for something again. Like me partaking in a personal hobby actually has meaning. And whenever I make a video talking about some obscure Charlie and the Chocolate Factory trivia, it makes me feel like I've accomplished something. Not only do I get to bring something obscure to the forefront, but I also get to educate you guys and share my experience and knowledge with the world. It's given me sort of a guided personal purpose, something I found lots of comfort in. Something I can find solace in whenever things start getting rough. Whether it's fun facts about the films, the backstories and trivia behind the books, the mystical and strange veil of Nestle's abandoned and forgotten Wonka Candy Company, there's a lot you can invest your time into researching, and there's a lot to rave about. It feels like forever ago when I really first started to get into Willy Wonka, when in all actuality it's only been about a year and a half. And it's been a whole year since my old Willy Wonka iceberg video. A whole year! And for some reason, the universe smiles upon me today because this coincides with my channel's 5-year anniversary. Now, to celebrate such a monumentous occasion, I wanted to go big or go home. To push myself to my human limits, and produce one of the biggest videos that I've ever made. And last year, all of this information about my big birthday blowout pretty much hit me like a truck. And I knew I had to hit home with something equally as powerful. By mid to late December of 2022, I wanted to start 2023 off fresh, so I decided to make this sort of Wonka War series where I compare the films with the original novel. I started this series with the 1971 film since it is the first Willy Wonka film and the one that most people are familiar with. After this, I did what is technically the next film adaptation, Calle och Chokladfabriken. For those of you who don't know, Chocolate Fabrican was this old Swedish Charlie and the Chocolate Factory cartoon that came out in 1983, a whole 12 years after the 1971 film. Now, as a special present to everyone, including myself, celebrating my big birthday blowout, I'm finally going to be giving my true, unadulterated thoughts on Charlie and the Chocolate Factory's 2005 movie adaptation. Oh, buddy, listen far, listen wide, because do I have a piggy bank of my 2 cents worth on this movie? Putting things very lightly, I hate this film. It is, without a shadow of a doubt, the single worst Willy Wonka thing that has ever been made. This film is tactless. This film is stupid. This film is obnoxious. It is callous. It is despicable. It is all of the above. It is the guaranteed, genuine worst. And considering just how acquainted I am with this franchise, this would rightfully be considered a bold statement. I have seen tons of stupid, bad, or just mediocre crap come from the Wonka name. I've seen the book's stupid and ridiculous sequel. I've seen what are genuinely some of the absolute worst advertisements I've ever seen in my life associated with the Wonka name. I've seen the painfully disappointing World of Willy Wonka video games. I've seen the subpar and obnoxious Broadway musical. I've seen the Tom and Jerry crossover film. I've seen interesting pieces of Wonka media become lost forever to the ether, with no hopes of them ever being found. And yet, even with these, all of these, I still think that the 2005 film is unironically, wholeheartedly, without a single shadow of a doubt, the most despicable and horrendous piece of media that Willy Wonka has ever spawned. The idea for a second, or third if you count the Swedish cartoon, adaptation was an idea for a long time, and a particularly rocky history soon led to the 2005 film being completed and first screening in the US on July 15th, 2005, leading to a plague of cynicism and mediocrity that has been poisoning Wonka for nearly 20 entire years now. This film is a tactless part of what is otherwise a comfort franchise that I really love. I absolutely love the Willy Wonka franchise and most of the products that have come from it. I am usually very positive with this franchise. And believe it or not, there was once a point where I actually didn't hate 2005 Wonka. Back during the first couple months of me really getting into this franchise, I thought the film and its version of Wonka were just mediocre at worst. But then I started to ponder the film more and more. I seriously started to consider some of the changes they made, and as I started to learn more about the whole Wonka timeline, and as I looked into the smaller aspects, I soon started to grow a deep-seated resentment towards this film. But with this said, I want to state right now that I do not hate anyone involved with this film. Johnny Depp is one of my favorite actors. I love his appearances in stuff like Rango and the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. I even like that character in that one SpongeBob special about surfing. He was my genuine highlight of that episode. Johnny Depp is a great dude, but like any actor, he has dud characters, and 2005 Wonka is his biggest dud character. As for others working on this film, I like Denny Elfman in a lot of his compositions. I like Freddie Highmore in a lot of the other characters that he'd go on to play later in his life. I don't even hate Tim Burton. However, just because this film has some of my most favorite actors in it does not mean it's getting away from me scot-free. Nor am I going to give this film meaningless brownie points just because it has some of my favorite actors in it. If it's a bad product, it's a bad product, and that's all there is to it. I'm this way for this whole franchise. Wonka is one of my favorite franchises, but that doesn't mean I baby it either. If I see a problem, I will point it out. Like the 1971 film, it's a great film, but oh, as an adaptation, that movie sucks. Back in 2007, I think, Nestle made these stupid, cringy musical Oompa Loompa ads to promote this virtual room contest thing they were holding at the time. And even though they're desperately trying to pander to tweens with their cringe rap and Sound of Silence parody, they're so bad they're good. These ads have aged like spoiled milk, and looking at them now, think about what Nestle and the Wonka Company were trying to accomplish. It brings this derpy smile to my face because it's so hilariously bad. I mean, it's still bad, it's still soulless, it's still trying to pander like no one's business, but there's just something so hilarious about how much of a hot mess it is. I was even tolerating the Tom and Jerry crossover film back when I first watched it. I mean, the film isn't good by any stretch, but like, I wasn't offended by it. I didn't think any parts of it were rage-inducingly bad. I wasn't groaning every 2 seconds. But aside from the really beautiful-looking background assets, nothing in that film blew me away. There weren't many positives, but nothing in this film was like super negative either, so it's meh. And then we got to the 2005 film, which dips into the rare territory of Willy Wonka version that I don't likey. I don't think that this film is 100% terrible, but overall the film is just abysmal. If you like the film then, that's great. I won't judge you for it. I can even see where you're coming from. I will not bash anyone's opinions here, nor am I persuading anyone to hate this film. I'm just stating my opinion, nothing more, nothing less. If you enjoy this film, have at it, I ain't bashing you for it. I even thought there were good moments in this film, things I found genuine enjoyment in. But unfortunately, this doesn't stop me from thinking that this film sucks like a black hole and blows like a quasar. But Joseph, I'm sure you're asking, what in Neptune's blue ocean did they do to this book to film adaptation that makes it sound so awful? In order to understand the film and some of the tactless stunts they pull in it, I think it's best we start at the very beginning. The concept of a second/third Charlie and the Chocolate Factory film adaptation was a thing for quite a while. Ever since 1991, they wanted to do another adaptation of the book, starting with Warner Brothers telling the Roald Dahl Estate, hey, we want to make a third Wonka film and you guys are in charge. And this sounds like a great decision. Making a book-to-film adaptation and giving total artistic control to the estate of the person who wrote the book that your movie is standing on. Now, with Roald Dahl's history, you might think this is a bad idea, but no, this isn't where the film went wrong. In fact, the film was always kind of in an awkward and rocky state to begin with. The film itself was actually in development limbo for a long while. The Dahl Estate, and the Dahl name in general, has kind of a knack for being far too protective of the man's works. Roald Dahl himself hated the 1971 film so much, to the point where he straight up disowned it. So I can imagine that his daughter, Lucy Dahl, the person that Warner Brothers gave their second adaptation the rights to, was rather apprehensive about transforming her father's work for the second time after it bombed so bad the first time. It took them 7 years for them to finalize the purchase, specifically purchasing the rights to use the Wonka characters. This was in 1998, and development would finally continue onward since then. During the late 90s and early 2000s, many people were signed on to the project, which is something we'll get into later. During this time, Willy Wonka was a very dominant force in our culture. Yes, the 1971 film was gaining popularity as it should have been. However, Willy Wonka was special back in the day, not necessarily because of Willy Wonka as Gene Wilder, but as this guy. Yes, this was the version of Wonka that dominated during the late 90s and early 2000s. A mascot for a candy company that barely anyone remembers or cares about anymore. But this company, long lost and forgotten now, back in the day was a huge phenomenon. You saw the Wonka brand everywhere. His name was associated with very popular candies like Nerds and Sweethearts. They aired amazing-looking commercials that had Mr. Wonka touring his amazing-looking factory. The dude even had his own website where you could play flash games, ask him such riveting questions such as, do you snore at night? And do all sorts of other activities. They held sweepstakes where you could win a free backyard pool, or a roller coaster trip for a family of 4, or a chance to attend a live recording of a prank Center TV show. They even did real-life Wonkamobile tours where Wonka himself left his factory and got to go out and about across the US, and he got to interact physically with his own most passionate fans. Back in the 90s, from around 1996 or 1994 specifically, and during the early 2000s, Willy Wonka was a very special character. So from that perspective, it makes sense that people behind the film would want to push working on it, considering Wonka's popularity during this time had skyrocketed. During this time, they had pushed many people and celebrities to direct the film or play Wonka himself. Some of the early director picks were Ang Lee, who directed the 2003 Hulk film and later 2012's Life of Pi, Terry Gilliam, a former Monty Python member and director of 2005's The Brothers Grimm, Anthony Minghella, who directed 1999's The Talented Mr. Ripley, and Spike Jonze, known for his work on the 2009 film version of Where the Wild Things Are. In early 1999, they hired Scott Frank, famous for his work directing Out of Sight a year before. He would write a screenplay for the film that remained largely faithful to the original book. Gary Ross, who directed the 2012 classic The Hunger Games, was hired to direct the film in 2000. However, both him and Frank left the crew a year later, with the latter not being able to stay due to scheduling issues for other films he was working on at the time. Later in that year, Rob Minkoff and Gwyn Lurie would be hired for director and screenwriter respectively, with the former having worked on the 2 Stuart Little movies and, oh no, the Haunted Mansion 2003 film. In the following year, Martin Scorsese was going to direct the film but left due to him being more interested in other projects. As for celebrities that were going to play Wonka, the first documented actor who was known to be hired for the job was Oh no! Another person who was going to play Wonka in this film's early years was Jim Carrey. Oh man, I actually really want to see how he could have fit into Wonka's shoes. That actually sounds awesome. Another person was Marilyn Manson, who was actually a really big Willy Wonka fan, believe it or not. Robin Williams was also considered for the role of Wonka, which again sounds awesome. Man, I wish I lived in the universe where that was actually the case. Will Smith was also considered. Again, I would have love to see him play Willy Wonka of all characters. Literally 3 members of Monty Python were considered like, okay, what is it with this franchise and the weird affiliation with Monty Python? Seriously. Michael Keaton was also considered, and so was Mike Myers? Now, this was all happening during the late 90s and really early 2000s. In May of 2003, the first big fall of this film was bestowed upon his existence. Tim Burton was hired as the film's final director. Okay, look, before I say anything, I want to restate what I said in the beginning. I do not have any ill will towards anyone who was involved with this film, especially Johnny Depp. In order to understand how Tim Burton's influence screwed this movie over so horribly, let's look at the film itself in context with the original book. And believe me, I shall leave no stone unturned. I'm going to talk about so many of the differences, big and small. I'm not going to be talking about every small difference like small changes in dialogue. I'm just going to be discussing the changes that were majorly noticeable to me, which are still a lot. And no, I don't hate this film just because of the deviations they make from it, even though they are a major problem. And soon, these problems would plague the final film on July 15, 2005, when the film would release and set up everything we're about to see. Well, that date may or may not be true, considering a kind of soft launch on July 10th, 2005, airing in Grumman's Chinese Theater. Oh, and would launch in the UK on July 29th, and okay, yes, I know I'm stalling. Let's actually get into this rant fest. We first see the opening credits, which are oddly dark and snowy. Yeah, we're like 5 seconds into this film, and its biggest non-Wonka problem is shining through already. These opening credits pan into one of the smoke chimneys inside the factory, and we see the title, along with some really off-putting, annoying action music. We see some Wonka bars being made, and said Wonka bars are having golden tickets hidden inside the wrappers by mysterious person X. We see the outside of the factory, again uncharacteristically dark and gloomy, and we see a bunch of Wonka delivery trucks. And now we get to see the film's main star, Charlie Bucket, an ordinary boy. No, we don't start off with his grandparents. We gotta show the audience one of the only important main characters. We see Mrs. Bucket preparing cabbage soup, and she's played by Helena Boheman Carter, because of course she is. We see Charlie doing his homework, and I guess I should get this out of the way. He's played by Freddie Highmore, who has gone on to play Dr. Murphy from The Good Doctor, and Norman Bates from the Bates Motel series. Mr. Bucket walks in, and he's played by Noah Taylor, who has also played, David Helfgott from the biography movie Shine. Yeah, you've heard of it, right? And Grandpa Joe is played by David Kelly, who has also played Mr. O'Reilly from Fawlty Towers. Wait, what do you mean you don't know about that show? Here we get to see how poor the Bucket family is. They all live in a little trash house, they're all wearing rags, and all of the grandparents have to sleep in one bed, and Mrs. Bucket is making cabbage soup, and chopping up actual cabbage. Mr. Bucket gives Charlie a bunch of deformed toothpaste caps, and he gets these caps from his job at the toothpaste factory. The hours are long and the pay is terrible. Charlie has been using these to build a huge diorama of the Wonka Candy Factory, the largest and most renowned candy factory in the world, that by some miracle just so happens to be in the same town that Charlie lives in. Grandpa Joe compliments his grandson's work, and then we hear about how Grandpa Joe literally used to work for Wonka. Bits of out there random lore that weren't in the book. My favorite flavor! Though in all seriousness, the random lore problem is going to come back, and it's gonna bite this movie hard. Also, Grandma Georgina says, "I love grapes," for no reason. Here we cue the portion where Grandpa Joe gives exposition on Willy Wonka, except, with the random context of him just being one of the man's ex-minions. Apparently Wonka's factory started 20 years ago and was once a little candy store. My favorite flavor, it tastes like the baked beans! He tells Charlie about the never melt chocolate ice cream, the notion of the factory being 50 times bigger than any other, just like in the book. Although with the added bit of Grandpa Joe making out with his wife, and Charlie interrupts it because we gotta add them baked beans. And then we go to the Indian Prince story. What, no exposition on the violet marshmallows or the rainbow caramels? I mean, they already did the sugar, but why is this so out of order? We hear about how the prince wants a palace made entirely out of chocolate, and we even get the specification of it having 100 rooms and made of either light or dark chocolate, and specifically the bricks and cement and the carpets and the furniture all being made of chocolate, although there is no mention of a chocolate telephone in the book. The prince says he intends to live in the palace against Mr. Wonka's warnings. On a hot day, specifically with a boiling sun, the entire palace melts. Now, in the 2005 film, he sent an urgent telegram to Mr. Wonka for a new palace, but Mr. Wonka couldn't answer because he was facing his own problems. Confectionery competitors and a lowbrow attempt to compete with Mr. Wonka sent spies to work in his factory and steal his recipes. Now in the book, after hearing about the Indian prince, the grandparents tell him about the mysterious new little people in the factory and how no one ever goes in or ever comes out. And then they go to the part with corporate espionage and Mr. Wonka firing his old workforce. But in the film, it talks about the corporate espionage first. We see a spy handing a recipe to a very off-putting looking Slugworth, and then we see the aftermath with his rival selling knockoff candies, and then we hear about Wonka's mass firing, and then it just sorta ends. We cut to everyone complaining about cabbage soup, and then we get a hint of there being little people in the factory, but then everyone is sent to bed. And by this point, Grandpa Joe's story is completed instead of it being interrupted. Oh, and Charlie sleeps in this little attic thing that has a bunch of Wonka stuff everywhere. And this room was never mentioned in the book. Baked beans, guys. Baked beans. We then see a bunch of bikers coming out of the Wonka factory, hanging up little posters. The next day, the town is in awe over these posters, which read, and I quote, "Dear people of the world, I, Willy Wonka, have decided to allow 5 children to visit my factory this year. These lucky 5 will be shown around personally by me, and will learn all the secrets and the magic of my factory. 5 golden tickets have been hidden inside the ordinary wrapper paper of 5 ordinary Wonka bars. These 5 candy bars may be anywhere, in any shop, in any street, in any town, in any country of the world. In addition, one of these children will receive a special prize beyond anything you could ever imagine." This is contrary to how it is played out in the book, where we hear about it through a newspaper brought home by Mr. Bucket, with said newspaper reading as follows. I, Willy Wonka, have decided to allow 5 children, just 5, mind you and no more, to visit my factory this year. These lucky 5 will be shown around personally by me, and they will be allowed to see all the secrets and the magic of my factory. Then, at the end of the tour, as a special present, all of them will be given enough chocolates and sweets to last them the rest of their lives. So watch out for the golden tickets. 5 golden tickets have been printed on golden paper, and these 5 golden tickets have been hidden underneath the ordinary wrapper paper of 5 ordinary bars of chocolate. These 5 chocolate bars may be anywhere, in any shop, in any street, in any town, in any country of the world, upon any counter where Wonka sweets are sold. And the 5 lucky finders of these golden tickets are the only ones who will be allowed to visit my factory and see what it's like now inside. Good luck to you all and happy hunting. Signed, Willy Wonka. Going back to the 2005 movie, we then see some of the chaos caused by the new sweepstakes. In multiple areas around the world, there is pandemonium with everyone trying to get their hands on Wonka bars. This was detailed in the book, though it's more specific in this film when we only hear about it after we see Augustus Gloop getting interviewed on the TV. We get some fluff with the family that was in the book, and this time is actually placed correctly, right before Augustus's news interview. And Grandma George alludes to Augustus's existence. And then we cut to Augustus being interviewed. He's a big fat German kid. While being interviewed, Augustus says some lines that weren't in the book about how he thinks the golden ticket tastes like different things. Mrs. Gloop repeats altered versions of only the first few sentences she says with her introduction in the book, although they did keep the part where Grandma Georgina calls Augustus a repulsive boy. Or is it Grandma Josephina? I don't know, dude, it's hard to tell. We then immediately cut to Veruca Salt being interviewed. No exposition on how the world is going crazy, no gold searching machine causing havoc in a department store, no mention of some dude robbing a bank to get Wonka bars, none of that. Veruca spells out her name, which she didn't do in the book, and Mr. Salt's speech here is largely the same as it is in the book. Specifically the 3 days part and him buying thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. Although we see Mr. Salt, being a straight up alcoholic. Oh my gosh. Oh, and Veruca says she wants another pony after getting her golden ticket. Grandma George is the one who says she's worse than Augustus instead of Grandma Josephine. However, instead of Mrs. Bucket putting her son to bed that evening, they instead open Charlie's birthday present early, on that exact same evening. And of course there's no golden ticket. They even have the Wonka bar being Wonka's Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mellow Delight, just like as detailed in the book. He shares it with his family, although there isn't any protest from them like in the book. After this, we see Charlie getting some newspapers out of the trash, which is strange because in the book it was supposed to be Mr. Bucket's. The newspaper details about how Violet Beauregard is the next golden ticket winner. And by the way, remember all the times where this film baked the book's beans? Out of all the children, Violet has arguably been changed the most. Now in the book, Violet's main shtick is that she's a gum chewer, something that I and many others find astronomically obnoxious. So much to the point where it was her one main thing and it could fill that role completely. In the book, she'd go on and on about how proud of a gum chewer she is and how she knows her gum-related antics are gross and that she uses them to terrorize public transport. She also took pride in how much she chewed gum, like how she stated in the book that she had just taken on the world record for gum chewing, beating her friend to that title. She finds so much pride enjoying it that she recollects about her short history as a gum chewer despite how much her mother disliked it. She could be an egoist, but gum chewing was her main thing in the book. And then we get to Violet in the 2005 film, where her traits are largely reversed. She's still a gum chewer, but it's mainly overshadowed by her being this massive sports egoist and sore winner. First thing we see of her is her being a karate master, and when she's in the interview, we see a bunch of sports trophies, and we see Violet and her mom both wearing athletic jumpsuits. Again, the gum chewing is there, but that's it, it's just there. There is none of her being all proud because of her gum chewing, none of her being all egotistical about specifically beating her friend at the gum chewing world record, or her finding joy in terrorizing others with her chewed up gum. Her mom doesn't even seem to mind it that much. There isn't any mention of her disliking it. Aside from her staring off into space with the most terrifying expression ever, there isn't any body language that says she doesn't like the gum chewing. I mean, they had to keep the gum chewing because it was essential to the plot and morals of the book, but I just find this change really odd. After what would be this point in the book, we cut directly to Mike TV being interviewed, and hey, it plays out the same way in the 2005 film. But this film didn't do Mike TV many favors either. In the book, he was seen watching gunslinging western shows on a massive TV. He absolutely loves TV. He was a television addict, and he had a bunch of toy pistols strapped to his shirt. And this kid does nothing but go on and on about how much he loves TV and his programs, and he's a massive jerk about it, forcing everyone in the interview to shut their mouths. Mike loved TV so much to the point where he knew how it worked inside and out. Now, what is Mike like in the 2005 movie? In the scene where he's being interviewed, we see that he is this crazy and angry kid who is enjoying first-person shooter video games. He's not just addicted to television, he's addicted to playing console games on his TV. Specifically a first-person shooter, which I guess is a good trade considering weapons are still involved, but still, it's just blah. Mike TV explains how he found the golden ticket using logic and statistics, and because of this he was able to find the golden ticket on his first try. Even though this was never a thing in the book, and Mike in the book won the golden ticket out of sheer luck. Also, in the film, Mike says he hates chocolate in the most obnoxious way possible. And then Grandpa George gets all ticked off and proceeds to rant and rave with Charlie's dad's covering his ears. Now, at this point in the book, we would cut to Grandpa Joe and Charlie enjoying some non-winner's chocolate, with the former having bought it with a secret stash of cash. And then we would hear about Mr. Bucket getting laid off his toothpaste job thanks to the entire business going under. In the film, it's structured differently. Gotta love them molecularly rearranged baked beans. In the film, we first get to hear about how Mr. Bucket was laid off his job. Not because the business went under, but because they hired a robot arm to take his place. And then we get to see Grandpa Joe and his secret stash of cash to buy a bar of chocolate. Obviously, the dialogue is altered here, and then jump scare! In the book, Charlie returned home with a Wonka's Nutty Crunch surprise. I think it's in the same as the film, though it's kind of hard to tell. Like in the book, there is no golden ticket inside. Next in the film, we see Charlie outside of the factory sniffing the chocolatey air, which is a detail from this point in the book. We see two snooty dudes walking their dogs, and they mention how the last kid in Russia found the last golden ticket. That's not even remotely how Russia was detailed in the book. In the book, there was this woman from Russia who forged the second golden ticket, not some kid who found like what I can assume was a forged fifth one. We then see the fabled moment where Charlie gets his money off the ground, although in this film it's $10, not 50 pence. Charlie runs to the candy store and he asks for a Wonka's Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mallow Delight just like in the book. He opens it, cut to a woman reading a newspaper about the fake Russian ticket, and then we just so happen to see that Charlie wins the real fifth golden ticket, which is rather strange because Charlie in the book ate his one chocolate bar and then asked for another, and he found that ticket inside of that second bar. Also, the shopkeeper doesn't freak out or leap a foot in the air like he does in the book, nor does he alert everyone. Everyone else just sort of notices by themselves. And when they do notice, a mob instantly forms around Charlie instead of it taking a couple of seconds to sink in. People start to gather around Charlie. One tries to bribe him with $20 in a bicycle instead of 50 pounds in a bicycle like in the book, and a crazy lady offers him $500 instead of 200 pounds. The store owner tells Charlie to run off with the ticket, oddly with no sort of good luck goodbye like he did in the book. And there is none of Charlie saying, "I'll see you soon," as he passed the factory. Dude, this movie is literally unwatchable. He goes home and, with the entire family at the house, immediately hands the golden ticket to Grandpa Joe, who sees it and with absolutely no hesitation or questioning gets up and does a dance. In the book, Charlie goes home and tells everyone how he found the golden ticket in the shop, about the mob that surrounded him and everything. And then there's just this moment of silence where everyone thinks Charlie is pranking them, but then Charlie shows Grandpa Joe the ticket and then he gets up and does a dance. Also in the book, it's detailed how Grandpa Joe's soup flew in Grandma Georgina's face, and it's at this point in the book where Mr. and Mrs. Bucket would come into the house, but in the film they've been at the house the entire time. In the film, Mr. Bucket is seen reading it while standing up, though in the book he slumps down in a chair and then reads it. We then get to finally see what's engraved onto the golden ticket. In the book it says, and I quote, "Greetings to you, the lucky finder of this golden ticket, from Mr. Willy Wonka. I shake you warmly by the hand. Tremendous things are in store for you. Many wonderful surprises await you. For now, I do invite you to come to my factory and be my guest for one whole day. You and all others who are lucky enough to find my golden tickets. I, Willy Wonka, will conduct you around the factory myself, showing you everything that there is to see. And afterwards, when it is time to leave, you will be escorted home by a procession of large trucks. These trucks, I can promise you, will be loaded with enough delicious eatables to last you and your entire household for many years. If, at any time thereafter, you should run out of supplies, and I shall be happy to refill your cupboard with whatever you need. In this way, you will be able to keep yourself supplied with tasty morsels for the rest of your life. But this is by no means the most exciting thing that will happen on the day of your visit. I am preparing other surprises that are even more marvelous and more fantastic for you and all my beloved golden ticket holders. Mystic and marvelous surprises that will entrance, delight, intrigue, astonish, and perplex you beyond measure. In your wildest dreams, you cannot imagine that such things could happen to you. Just wait and see. And now, here are your instructions. The day I have chosen for the visit is the first day in the month of February. On this day, and on no other, you must come to the factory gates at 10 o'clock sharp in the morning. Don't be late, and you are allowed to bring with you either one or two members of your own family to look after you and to ensure that you don't get into mischief. One more thing, be certain to have this ticket with you, otherwise you will not be admitted. Signed, Willy Wonka. And this is what it says in the 2005 film. Greetings to you, the lucky finder of this golden ticket, from Mr. Willy Wonka. I shake you warmly by the hand. For now, I do invite you to come to my factory and be my guest for one whole day. I, Willy Wonka, will conduct you around the factory myself, showing you everything there is to see. Afterwards, when it is time to leave, you will be escorted home by a procession of large trucks, each one filled with all the chocolate you could ever eat. And remember, one of you lucky 5 children will receive an extra prize beyond your wildest imagination. Now, here are your instructions. On the first day of February, you must come to the factory gates at 10 a.m. sharp. You are allowed to bring one member of your family to look after you. Until then, Willy Wonka. The 2005 version is mostly the same, aside from in the book you were allowed to bring 1 or 2 chaperones to the tour, but in the 2005 film it details how you're only allowed to bring 1. Also, because of the chaperone difference, instead of Mr. Bucket refusing to go along thanks to Grandpa Joe's Wonka knowledge, in the 2005 film is that he agrees to have Grandpa Joe go with Charlie for the exact same reasoning. Grandpa Joe seems excited, but then Charlie says no, because he'd actually be willing to trade in the golden ticket for money, saying that the family needs the money more than the chocolate. Alright then. Grandpa Joe gets all butthurt, but then Grandpa George convinces Charlie to change his mind by saying that the golden ticket is far too rare to be traded in for money. This wasn't in the book. I don't get the point of this. Also, there is no swarm of news reporters showing up at their front door like in the book. It just sorta cuts to the snowy morning outside the factory gates. We get a long, hot minute of a bunch of characters giving each other the stink eye, with a little bit of dialogue thrown in, especially with Mr. Bucket saying it's a mere 1 minute before the factory opens, and Veruca being a massive brat as usual. Charlie asks Grandpa Joe if Wonka will recognize him, and then Violet's mom is being a creepy Karen, as per usual. The factory gates slowly open, and we hear Wonka's voice granting them access to the factory's entrance. When everyone gets to the front steps, they're greeted with a show? Courtesy of Circus Baby's Pizza World? This was never a thing in the book. There's a little empty throne that pops up at the end, and then the animatronic show just malfunctions and bursts into flames. Now is about the time where Willy Wonka himself shows up in the flesh. Not as his young self in a flashback, but as the actual real deal. And I want you people to really think about this for a minute here. This was a popular book character being represented by this huge Hollywood blockbuster film, made by one of the most popular directors at the time, with Wonka himself being played by what is a genuinely awesome actor. I'm sure everyone involved knew just how monumental this was. I mean, this dude was going to be a major face for the entire Willy Wonka franchise going forward. They needed to go out of their way to make this the best version of Willy Wonka that they could. Now, with all of this said, what does this new version of Willy Wonka look like? I'm done! I'm done! I'm done! I am
We are currently experiencing technical difficulties due to circumstances of potentially apocalyptic significance beyond our control. An Aperture Science Reintegration Associate will revive you for an interview when society has been rebuilt.
Okay, so after hours of intense therapy and saltwater gargling, I am ready to get back to this film. Okay, so this is Mr. Willy Wonka, and the way they baked his beans in this film is earth-shatteringly bad. In the book, Mr. Wonka was described as this short dude with a black top hat, a black pointed goatee, a plum-colored velvet tailcoat, bottle green trousers, pearly gray gloves, and he carried a gold-tipped cane. It's a colorful design and works very well with the wacky and bubbly person the book version of Wonka is supposed to be. And then we have 2005 Wonka, and his design is just... no. This version of Wonka has a black top hat, a very off-putting brownish red bob cut, a mauve-colored dress coat, which is not a tailcoat, black shiny dress pants, and shiny purple latex gloves. Johnny Depp, I am so sorry that Tim Burton dragged you into this. The only things they kept were his black top hat, the color of his eyes, they're blue just like Book Wonka, and I think the gloves count? Also in the book, Mr. Wonka was described as this very playful and sharp individual, sorta like the world's happiest squirrel. He had pep in his step. In the 2005 film though, he feels like molasses. Book Wonka was very social and outgoing, but this dude is antisocial. Now, I would explain everything else as to why 2005 Wonka fails on every single level known to man and several known to monkeys, but I don't want this part to drag on for too long, and I do plan on actually covering 2005 Wonka's everything later in the video, so I'm just gonna leave it at that and move on with the movie. After the weird welcome song ends, Willy Wonka is seen just hanging out next to the rest of the gang. He just appeared there for no reason. Oh, and he just compliments himself on his fantastic work on his song. Oh, aren't you something special? Violet asks the very appropriate question of, who are you? And Grandpa Joe answers, it's Willy Wonka. Cue an awkward silence, and then Mr. Wonka breaks it by saying his classic line, good morning, Starshine, the Earth says hello. I don't get it at all. This was never in the book. This was not needed. This does not compute. Mr. Wonka then pulls out some improv cards and then starts reading them to everyone, and he disses Veruca Salt about where he was while the welcome song was happening. Grandpa Joe introduces himself and Wonka disses him too, though it's nowhere near as satisfying as you think it'd be. And now, finally, after thousands of years, we can finally move on. Oh my sweet mother of mercy. But, wait, the kids didn't even introduce themselves? You want to know exactly how this played out in the book? While the 5 kids and their parents are on the factory grounds, Wonka wastes no time in introducing himself to the 5 kids. And then they walk straight into the actual interior of the factory. There was none of this stupid filler improv bullcrap. Yes, I know it's to show how socially awkward 2005 Wonka is, but there are other ways of showing it other than filling the scene with a bunch of pointless, awkward silence. You literally had him reading from the cards! Now we move on to the part where the 5 kids introduce themselves. Inside of the warm slanted hallway, except it's not all pastel pink and pleasant like described in the book, Wonka asks everyone to throw their coats on the floor instead of having them hang on hooks like in the novel. And the corridor is just straightforward and not some crazy diverging rabbit hole hallway. Which means none of his factory is underground, or at least the chocolate room isn't. Oh, and instead of Wonka welcoming these children with open arms like any good tour guide should, when Violet introduces herself to him, he just straight up says that he does not care. Veruca introduces herself and at least Wonka says the line from the book about Veruca being a wart, though he just says it and chuckles about it like the good friend he is. Augustus says hi and Wonka just kind of brushes him off with a very sarcastic remark. He doesn't even really greet Mike TV, he just sort of ticked off at him because Mike cracked the system. And then he meets Charlie and he says, and I quote, well, you're just lucky to be here, aren't you? In the most condescending way possible. Man, I hate this character. Wonka then points out their parents but has a hernia whilst trying to do so. Also, I think I should point this out right now because it's going to become very distracting if I don't, but in the book, the kids' chaperones were both of their parents, all except Charlie. In the film, it had to be changed because of the stupid one-person rule. Augustus chose his mom, Violet chose her mom, Veruca chose her dad, and Mike TV brought his dad. There, now that we have that out of the way, where were we? Wonka tries to mention their parents but has a hernia while doing so, and he has a conniption about a dad. Okay. I'm going to ask you people to keep this little plot point in mind because it's going to be elaborated on later. We see a couple of interactions from the other characters. They're all scumbags to each other except for Veruca and Violet. They form a truce for some reason. None of this was in the book! After this, we finally get to see the chocolate room. But before that, we see the tiny door. I mean, technically it's still a metal door, but there is no sign that says it's the chocolate room. And speaking of the chocolate room, oh boy. This version of the chocolate room is basically a bite-sized example of why the Tim Burton aesthetic screws this movie over so much. In the book, the chocolate room was a huge, beautiful valley with meadows and weeping willow and alder trees, with all kinds of flowers and buttercups, and there was a huge waterfall halfway down the valley going off a cliff. And in some illustrations for the original book and its sequel, the chocolate room is seen with an open sky above it. There was also glass pipes going from the chocolate room into the ceiling and the rest of the factory. With the way a lot of versions of the book are illustrated, the chocolate room gives off really magical and comforting rustic vibes, just like the rest of the book. But the chocolate room in the 2005 film? It just looks ugly! First and foremost, the color scheme. This is not vibrant and beautiful. It looks like an old painting from the 1800s, and not in a good way. The colors here are too dark. And let's not forget the fact that this is entirely indoors with imposing stone brick walls everywhere. This makes it look even more depressing. And the chocolate waterfall? It's in a rock face at the far end of the room instead of being in the middle of the valley. Seriously, why do Charlie and the Chocolate Factory adaptations keep doing this? And these plants? There aren't very many of them. I mean, there are mushrooms, which, mind you, don't really count as plants. I wouldn't mind this so much if the other things that were meant to be plants didn't look like seagrass and coral. These red trees, they don't look all happy and colorful. I mean, at least they have the weeping willow trees. I think that's a plus. In this chocolate room, Wonka warns everyone to not lose their heads, in contrast to the book where Wonka almost immediately directs everyone's attention to the chocolate river after they've had time to let everything sink in. Also in the film, Augustus starts to go psycho because food. Okay, now 2005 Wonka wants to direct everyone's attention to the river. He says it's of the finest quality, but does not tell us about how the river is enough to fill every bathtub and swimming pool in the entire country. He talks about his waterfall, rather smugly, and he skips over his candy bushes into his meadow, again talking about it rather smugly. After this, we get a long montage of everyone exploring the chocolate room. It's inoffensive, aside from Violet being a jerk to Charlie for no reason. After this, we then get to the Oompa Loompas, with Veruca pointing them out like in the book. And, oh yay, they baked the Oompa Loompas beans too. In the book, the Oompas were these little pale pixie people with long blonde hair and they were wearing loincloths. In the 2005 film, they have darker skin, black hair that's all slicked back with a spiked ponytail thing, and they have these rubber worker uniforms which change color depending on where they're stationed. Two of the parents then point them out instead of Charlie being the second one to point fingers. Mrs. Gloop asks where they're from, which as far as I can tell was never detailed in the book. Mr. Wonka, with Mr. Salt prompting him to, says they're imported from Lupaland instead of everyone shouting at once. And Mr. Salt is the one who doubts the land's existence instead of Mrs. Salt. Oh, and Mike TV asks if they're real instead of Charlie. And now we get to the backstory on the Oompa Loompas. We cut to a flashback with a slightly younger version of Wonka as he explores the jungles of Lupaland. He mentions hornswogglers and stonewangers and the terrible wicked wangdoodles. However, he skips the detail on wangdoodles and instead shows how he slays a huge wasp mosquito thing. He tells us about how the Oompas ate caterpillars and things and how they longed so dearly for cocoa beans. It shows how they used the cocoa bean as a huge symbol in their culture, and then Wonka convincing the chief to live with him in the factory with all the cocoa beans they could ever eat. Although 2005 Wonka's reasoning is nowhere near as specific as book Wonka's. There is also none of the leader getting all excited and throwing his bowl of caterpillars out the window. Also armpit farts, because why not? We also don't get any exposition on how Wonka transported the Oompas to the factory, or how he adjusted them to the modern industrialist world, or how the Oompas dress, nor does Veruca interrupt by screaming about how she wants her own Oompa Loompa. Wonka only really says the part about them being mischievous. Cut to Ms. Gloop calling out Augustus before the latter falls inside the chocolate river. There is none of Mr. Wonka begging Augustus to come away from the river. He just says that his chocolate must be untouched and that's it. And when his parents react in horror, all Wonka does is just roll his eyes in an obvious manner. And when Ms. Gloop begs for her son to be saved, all he does is just look on with a smug/uncaring expression. He looks up and sees an apparatus for the chocolate transport pipes and then back to Augustus. Augustus whirls inside, although Charlie and Grandpa Joe don't have a short back and forth about him getting stuck in the pipe. Now at this point in the book, Augustus would get unstuck and just sort of shoot upwards into the fudge room. Mr. Wonka would try and sort of fail to reassure Ms. Gloop about her son being fine, and then the Oompa Loompas would escort Mr. and Mrs. Gloop out of the factory. In the 2005 film, however, we get the Oompa Loompa song while Augustus is still stuck in the pipe. The song here is a modified version of what it is in the book. And instead of being a sort of tribal chant, it's this weird pop, jazz, hybrid ballad. The song itself is meh. The song ends and Wonka, of course, doesn't reassure about the Oompa Loompa song being nonsense and, oh, now you want to go to the part where Ms. Gloop is all worried about where her son will end up. Why didn't you do that before the Oompa Loompa song? Mr. Wonka says he's going up to the chocolate strawberry fudge room, just like in the book. Their banter is largely the same as in the book, with Wonka dissing Ms. Gloop about Augustus-flavored fudge. Only difference is that Mrs. Gloop doesn't retaliate back at him. Mr. Wonka does a victory screech, even though in the book he simply clicked his fingers 3 times. He gives the Oompa instructions on how to retrieve Augustus, but doesn't say how it would be a disaster if he actually got turned into fudge like Book Wonka did. Ms. Gloop gets dragged out of the room and Charlie asks about why the Oompas knew Augustus's name. And Wonka's answer is improv. He never questioned it in the book, so therefore there is no need to question it here. Mr. Wonka asks Violet to chime in and he disses chewing gum as an example of what improv is. Mike chimes in about improv in a normal volume of voice, might I add, and Mr. Wonka says, in the most condescending and insulting way possible, you really shouldn't mumble because I can't understand a word you're saying. We get the little bit from the book about Charlie and Grandpa Joe talking about the Oompa Loompas jokes. However, there isn't any verbal doubt on Grandpa Joe's end like in the book. Oh, and Mr. Wonka isn't all excited about moving on with the tour. Now we get to see the SS Wonkatania. In the book, it's this massive, fantastic pink Viking boat made of a shimmery, glass-like hard candy. It had many oars on each side of it, and it just sort of shows up with a great mist surrounding it as it floats up from the chocolate river. In this film, it just sort of rose into view instead of it having this fancy entrance. Oh, and when it pulls up to the tour contestants, the Oompas laugh. They laughed in the book as well, but they did more at points before this. Violet asks why they're laughing, which she also did in the book, and Wonka answers that it's probably because of the coca beans, even though Book Wonka said it was because the Oompas thought everything was a joke. Oh, and Mr. Wonka proudly says that chocolate releases endorphins in the brain that gives you the feeling of being in love. Yay! Oh, and 2005 Wonka never explains how this boat is supposed to be his private yacht. And Mr. Wonka isn't really beaming with joy at the boat's existence. He's largely uncaring as usual. Mr. Wonka gives Charlie and Grandpa Joe a ladle full of chocolate, even though in the book it was a mug. And Mr. Wonka does point out how starved the two look, but unlike Book Wonka, he doesn't express his concern about why they look so starved, and he doesn't ask what's the matter or whether or not they've had anything in their house to eat lately. And then him and like 2 of the other kids get into a small quarrel over them being short, and 2005 Wonka is a condescending little Nimrod like always. Charlie asks if Wonka remembers what his childhood was like, and now we get introduced proper to another part of this film that gets on my nerves. We get a flashback about Wonka's childhood and, oh boy. Young Willy Wonka, who is seen wearing a giant pair of obstructive braces, is the son of Wilbur Wonka, the most famous dentist in Wonka's hometown. We see Wilbur confiscating his son's Halloween candy and dissing the absolute tar out of sad candy. Like, he has the son in this big chair while he's scolding him about having Halloween candy. He says that he read about how some children are allergic to chocolate, and instead of actually listening to his son indirectly asking him to keep said chocolate, he dismisses him and throws all the candy into the fireplace while Wonka looks on with a horrified expression. So this is the first little instance of Wonka having a childhood where his father, which was not a plot point in the book mind you, is being an abusive little butt nugget. I would rant and rave and scream about why this is bad, but to avoid derailing this portion of the video, I'm just going to save it for later in the video and move on with the movie. Charlie snaps Wonka out of his trance and we get to the tunnel, although it's like this hole in the wall instead of looking like the entrance to a pipe, and there isn't any of Veruca complaining about wanting her own boat. Also, we skip the boat ride song and we go into this downward spinning slide thing, and then we get to the part where there are different doors. However, in the book, it was this gigantic white pipe they were inside of. Mr. Wonka isn't all excited and shouting for the Oompas to row faster like in the book. And there are multiple doors for each individual type of cream instead of how in the book there was one large door for all the creams. And when Mrs. Beauregard, instead of Mike, asked about the hair cream, Wonka says that he needs the moisture, instead of saying that there's no time to ask silly questions. And there's also, oh goodness me, what is that? Why is there a room with a cow being whipped? It wasn't even a cow in the book. It was a door containing whips and nothing more. And when Veruca, like in the book, asks about the whipping, Mr. Wonka, instead of answering in an earnest and happy manner, he is once again a condescending and callous Nimrod. Wonka is being a butt to Veruca, and there is no bit where Wonka raves about the room with the many beans. We see the door for jelly beans rush by for a second, but that's it for beans. At least not baked beans. Now we get to the inventing room. Wonka doesn't really introduce it right when they see the door, nor does he say Ficklegarber would give his front teeth to be allowed inside for just 3 minutes. We just sort of cut to the inventing room. In the book, the inventing room is described as the sort of huge rustic witch's kitchen with pots and pans and cauldrons and old-style machines, and there's smoke and steam everywhere. In the 2005 film, it's another instance of the dark aesthetic not working with this property. The 2005 film's inventing room is this dark science lab with glass beacons and stark metal machines with scattered colored parts. The welcoming and vintage kitchen that paralleled Book Wonka's character and aesthetic perfectly. But I guess by that logic, the dark and brooding modernistic science lab does match with 2005 Wonka's overall vibe, so Mr. Wonka then introduces the inventing room, but only says it's the most important room, and he doesn't warn everyone not to knock anything over. And we don't see Mr. Wonka being all happy and excited about being in the inventing room. Nor does he go to this cauldron with yellow goop and tastes it. Where is the heart and soul? Also, we see the everlasting gobstopper machine. In the book, it's the small machine that goes put and drops the gobstoppers into a basket on the floor. In the 2005 film, they get dropped into this tub of water, and Violet points it out instead of Wonka directing everyone's attention to it. And now we get to the hair toffee. In the book, there was this large cauldron of purple goo that was the hair toffee, but in the film, it's like this little area with beacons and a Bunsen burner. And 2005 Wonka calls the hair toffee a little bugger, because juvenile gross-out humor is just so funny. Mike TV asked who would want a beard instead of Ruka, and then Mr. Wonka, I'm not even going to try and dignify that with a response. Mr. Wonka then tells everyone about how the hair toffee is far too potent. In the book, we have Wonka telling everyone about how the hair toffee caused an Oompa Loompa to grow this massive beard that had to be dealt with a lawnmower. However, in the 2005 movie, we actually get to see the damage. An Oompa Loompa with super ultra long hair covering his entire figure. Now we come to the part with the meal gum machine. Wonka yet again doesn't make anywhere near as big a deal about it as he did in the book, and he pulls a lever to activate it, instead of pushing 3 buttons like Book Wonka did. Also, the meal gum machine was described as this massive machine with a ton of thin pipes running into a rainbow reservoir, and then a stick of gum would come out of a little drawer on the side of it. It doesn't even look like that in the 2005 film. How would you describe this? Violet very flatly states that it's gum, instead of being all excited. And Mr. Wonka describes it as the most sensational gum in the whole universe, instead of the most amazing and fabulous and sensational gum in the world. And again, 2005 Wonka has a painful lack of heart and soul. Mr. Wonka simply describes that it is a 3-course dinner instead of being so aesthetic that he can't find the words to describe it. When one of the fathers asks what good it is, Mr. Wonka pulls out his improv cards and reads from them, about how it will be the end of all kitchens and cooking, and just one strip is all you'll need at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. What happened to Book Wonka being all excited and going on spiels about how it will end mealtimes and dirty dishes, and him enthusiastically replying to Violet asking him about the gum? What happened to the happy? We then see Violet chewing the gum. Her mom points out that she's turning Violet, although she only uses the name twice instead of 3 times. And par for the course, 2005 Wonka is largely uncaring and indifferent at the fact that Violet is getting horrifically physically disfigured. Oh, you know, because that's what good Wonkas do, they don't care. Violet turns into a massive blueberry, and then the Oompa Loompas sing like this weird jazzy rap single that is once again halfway different and halfway faithful to the book. We then cut to the bit in between Violet and Veruca. Charlie and Mike question Wonka about the purpose of the tour, which, mind you, never happened in the book. Mike questions Wonka about gum, and Wonka, as per usual, says he should mumble because it's bumming him out. Charlie asks Wonka about the first candy he ever ate, and oh yeah, you know, their flashback, this is gonna be fun. We see young Wonka rummaging through the remains of the fire pit from earlier, and there's one piece of chocolate left intact. He eats it and then goes on a huge candy guzzling spree. We then end the flashback, and then... Okay, dude, you know what? Screw this. This movie is too stupid for me to handle right now.
Because of the technical difficulties we are currently experiencing, your test environment is unsupervised. The Enrichment Center respects your right to have questions or concerns about this policy.
Okay, I'm back, and Wonka is self-aware now, even though it completely breaks away from the immersion. Is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory a franchise known for self-aware humor? No. Then why did they add this line? We left off right before the fiasco with Veruca. At this point in the book, the group was going down this long hallway and we got a lot of fluffy exposition about various treats being made in the factory. Stuff like marshmallow pillows and the lickable wallpaper, hot ice cream, chocolate milk cows, and the fizzy lifting drinks. There was even this small bit where everyone observes these square sweets that look round. In the 2005 film, we don't get any of this. We are now at the point where we see the peanut shelling room, though Mr. Salt boasts about how he too works with shelling nuts, which wasn't in the book. Also, Mr. Wonka disses Mr. Salt and calls him weird, and this is something that I really need to bring up. Mr. Wonka being a jerk only works if you have him being a jerk to the parents. The parents are technically the ones responsible for the kids' bad behavior and allowing it to thrive. If you have Wonka being a jerk to what is technically the ones responsible and not a side effect of them, it works and it's actually funny. This is one of the precious few moments where 2005 Wonka is an actually enjoyable character. Had they understood this simple concept, it would have gone a long way. We see the inside of the peanut shelling room, where there are squirrels lying along the wall of a circular room, and they're shelling walnuts, throwing the bad nuts down a garbage chute in the center of the room. Veruca points out the squirrels, although neither Charlie or Grandpa Joe are the first ones to actually get everyone's attention, and Mike doesn't say, "Crikey!" Mr. Salt asks why Wonka uses squirrels instead of Mike TV, who asked that question in the book. Also, 2005 Wonka says squirrels get the whole nut out almost every single time, instead of Book Wonka triumphantly saying that they can get nuts out every single time, which is really concerning. Also, he doesn't specify that the squirrel closest to them is the one with the bad nut. Veruca asks her dad about having a squirrel, and then she rambles on about her pets. 1 pony and 2 dogs and 4 cats and 6 rabbits and 2 parakeets and 3 canaries and a green parrot and a turtle and a hamster. In the book, she states that she has 2 dogs and 4 cats and 6 bunny rabbits and 2 parakeets and 3 canaries and a green parrot and a turtle and a bowl of goldfish and a cage of white mice and a hamster. It's a subtle but important difference. Mr. Salt asks Wonka about a squirrel, but then the latter says no, she can't have one. Instead of snapping, Veruca turns to her dad, and then Mr. Wonka decides to imitate her dad in a way that's actually kind of funny. Veruca then goes down into the little inlet with the squirrels, and instead of Wonka calling and begging her to not do it, 2005 Wonka just makes a dumb adult joke, because he's the most shining and perfect role model ever. The squirrels all rush from their seats and start to siege Veruca. All while her dad watches on in horror, Mr. Wonka slowly takes his time to find the key that unlocks the gate. All while the squirrels are mobbing Veruca in a particularly distressing display. Mr. Wonka is slowly and tediously trying, in massive sarcasm quotes, to try to find the right key. All while he has this stupid grin on his face. The squirrels deem her a bad nut and then drag her down the garbage chute. Mr. Salt asks where she's going instead of Mrs. Salt, and he asks Mr. Wonka where the chute goes, and he answers down the rubbish chute, instead of how in the book, Wonka just said it without any prompting. And then 2005 Wonka continues by saying, "To the incinerator," with a smile on his face. And then he turns to Mr. Salt with the same smile and says, "Oh, they light it only on Tuesdays." And then Mike says that today is Tuesday. Okay, so in the book, first of all, the furnace was lit every other day, not only on one day of the week. Also, Book Wonka was all calm and collected, but in a way that made it feel like he knew these children were going to be fine. Also, in the book, Mr. and Mrs. Salt were absolutely fuming at Mr. Wonka, but Wonka is calm and reassuring about the whole situation. With Book Wonka, there's always this sort of knowledge that you're safe. No one is getting gravely injured. And yes, that is another deduction for 2005 Wonka. You're welcome. Mr. Salt goes down to the little area, and now we get the Oompa Loompa song, even though in the book, Mr. Salt fell down first, then the song happened. As for the Oompa Loompa song, same ordeal, kind of not really being the same as in the book, it's alright. A squirrel kicks Mr. Salt down the garbage chute right when the song ends. We hear about how the furnace stopped working and how it's not active, which was never in the book, they just sort of left and went on after this. We then see Mr. Wonka and the crew going inside the great glass elevator, even though Charlie and Mike TV more or less prompted him to go in the elevator in the book. The elevator is largely the same as it is in the book, this crazy glass elevator with buttons. However, the 2005 elevator only has buttons on like 2 parallel walls and not on the ceiling. The book elevator had buttons on all the walls and the ceiling. And the 2005 elevator doesn't have straps, so there isn't a lot of people being flung around everywhere and none of the TV parents almost becoming sick while riding the elevator. And now we get to what is actually my most favorite part of the whole movie, the part where we see random bits of the factory via riding the Great Glass Elevator. In the book, we see the following: a huge chocolate water spout, a fudge mountain, a snowstorm simulation machine, a caramel lake, and an Oompa Loompa village. In the 2005 movie, it goes Fudge Mountain, a cotton candy sheep farm, a puppet infirmary. Dude, I was making jokes about Five Nights at Freddy's earlier. What in the world? This huge vertical administration office, and then the exploding candies for your enemies, which was mentioned in the book, but we actually get to see them in action here. I like how they're using the exploding candies as actual weapons. Yes, it's different from the book, but the changes they made here do actually feel in line with the book. They feel like something you'd actually see in the book. But, of course, we can't have anything good with this movie, so we have to ruin one of its best parts by bringing up one of its worst. Mike TV triggers another Wonka flashback, where Wilbur Wonka is scolding his son, saying that no son of his is going to be a chocolatier, and in response, young Wonka runs away. We see young Wonka go through the many flags of the world, and you think he's traveling and gets stopped at an airport that's closing for the night, but actually no, he never even left his hometown, he was just looking at flags in a museum. But guess what? Wilbur Wonka threatened his son that he wouldn't be back if his son decided to come back, and guess what? He was right. He literally teleported his entire little building away from the rest of the buildings. And flashback, and we have Mike TV picking a room. In the book, he got to pick a room when they first entered the elevator. Now we enter the WonkaVision room. In the book, it's this long corridor with a huge TV camera on one end and a small black table with a huge TV set on the other end. In the film, it's more of a circular room with this camera apparatus thing in the middle. Mr. Wonka doesn't hop up and down with excitement as they enter, and they just sort of have the part where Wonka explains how he got the idea after they enter, even though in the book, there's a bit of banter with Mike and Mr. Wonka about how television works. Mike says some sciencey stuff, again not in the book, but then Wonka interrupts him again by saying he's a mumbler, and that he couldn't understand a single word Mike was saying, even though he was speaking loud and clear. Mr. Wonka, in the most nondescript and straightforward way possible, announces his plan of using his machine to teleport a bar of chocolate. Like described in the book, 6 Oompas carry a huge Wonka bar. Wonka tells everyone why the bar is so big, though his description is nowhere near as fun or detailed like it was in the book. We get the bright flash of light, and later the bar shows up in the TV with a bunch of gorillas. Mike TV doubts the idea of being able to grab it from the TV, but 2005 Wonka calls him a scaredy cat because why not? So Wonka has Charlie do it. Grandpa Joe says, "Holy buckets," about it instead of being all ecstatic and calling it a miracle that will change the world. Mr. Wonka has this "eat Wonka's chocolates" moment, though he words it different than how Book Wonka said it. Mr. TV asks about other things being sent through the camera like breakfast cereal, and while Book Wonka is absolutely disgusted by the mere mention of the terrible, no good, very bad breakfast cereal, 2005 Wonka reacts with nowhere near as much as disgust. Mike TV chimes in about how his invention could change the world, completely stealing Grandpa Joe's thunder. Mike TV attempts to prove a point by going up to the WonkaVision machine and testing it on himself. All Mr. Wonka does here is lightly protest. Instead of him yelling, "No, no, no, no!" And there isn't him reassuring Mike's parents by saying, "We shall have to hope for the best, and we must pray that your little boy will come out unharmed at the other end." Oh, and Mr. Wonka asks Mr. TV if and which side of his son he would choose, because that's clearly how you comfort a distressed parent. And when Mr. TV rightfully gets mad at it, Mr. Wonka is all like, "No need to snap, it's just a question." Are you stupid? I don't. Now we get the Oompa Loompa song, and I will admit, it's actually surprisingly good. Genuinely the best song out of the 4. Although when compared to the book, again the lyrics are rearranged, and in the book, the song happens after Mike and his parents are escorted to the Laffy Taffy Puller. Also, since Mrs. TV isn't present, there is no Mike throwing a tantrum about his parents threatening to throw out their television set, nor is there Mike TV putting his son in his coat pocket. And Mr. TV isn't thankful about 2005 Wonka's Laffy Taffy Puller idea. Also, there is no mention of the Wonka vitamin. Or any vitamins for that matter. Mr. TV is escorted out of the WonkaVision room, and we see that Charlie and Grandpa Joe are the last remaining contestants, though there is none of Wonka swinging around in surprise when he realizes this. Oh, and also... Okay, so I want to pause right here and really examine this line, because it perfectly summarizes a major flaw in 2005 Wonka's character. He says, "What happened to the others?" so nonchalantly. Whether or not he's straight up oblivious to the fact that he horribly disfigured children really does not matter. The fact that he says this line to begin with means that he does not care. He does not give a flying crap. And yes, I get that these children are brats and everything, but they're still human. They just don't know the error of their ways. Now consider this with Book Wonka. In the book, Wonka showed a bit of apathy, yes, but it also felt like he genuinely cared about these children. He saw that these children didn't know any better thanks to how their parents raised them and that he was just trying to teach them a lesson. That's why in the book, the cartoonish and over-the-top punishments felt justified. Book Wonka actually cared about these children despite them being brats. He was punishing them out of tough love, to have them see the error of their ways and for them to grow up into more behaved adults. Then we have 2005 Wonka. This one Triton forsaken line is proof that 2005 Wonka does not care about these children at all. He doesn't care about them seeing grow up to be more behaved adults. He doesn't care about these children bettering themselves. These are the people he's largely marketing towards, and yet he does not care in the slightest about them. These are the people he's largely marketing towards, and yet he does not care about them in the slightest. He showcases an unsurpassed amount of apathy towards the children when they're going through these now unjustified feeling horrific punishments. And what makes this even more insulting is the fact that you have this stupid tragic backstory to kill this even more. They legit want you to try and sympathize with this character. But how am I supposed to do that when 2005 Wonka is acting like a freaking beef jerky? I once again could go on for minutes and minutes on end until I'm blue in the face. But I'm going to be sort of studying 2005 Wonka's character later in the video, so I'm just gonna shut up and move on with the movie. For the third time, Mr. Wonka congratulates Charlie, albeit he seems nowhere near as excited as Book Wonka was, or ever will be. And his speech is basically a condensed version of what is in the book, much like a lot of other things from this movie. The gang goes inside the glass elevator, throwing away their shades, which yes was not in the book, and Wonka presses the up and out button, although it's this nondescript button just normally on the wall, instead of it being on the very top of the ceiling like it was in the book. They shoot upwards, but sadly Grandpa Joe doesn't say yippee like in the book, and Mr. Wonka says they'll need to gain speed to break through the factory roof. Although 2005 Wonka isn't banging on the side of the wall in nervousness, and he doesn't specify about him waiting to press that button for years. And of course, instead of reassuring Grandpa Joe about the elevator shattering, he just laughs about it. The elevator breaks through, and instead of sort of magically suspending itself in the air with the press of a button, it has like rocket drone propeller things. I'll admit, it does look pretty cool. Oh, and obviously, Mr. Wonka doesn't calm the two down about having levitation, because we gotta have everyone know you weren't safe when 2005 Wonka's around. He also doesn't explain that the elevator runs on sugar power. Now we cut to the four brats leaving the factory. Instead of sort of transitioning there thanks to Wonka pointing it out, Augustus is now covered in chocolate instead of him just being thin like in the book. Violet is all blue now and also flexible because baked beans. Veruca and her dad are both covered in garbage, and Mike is now super long and thin. Sadly, we don't get any commentary about them from Charlie and Mr. Wonka like was described in the book. And now this film takes a real hard left turn. At this point in the book, Wonka would direct the glass elevator away from the scene, and he'd excitedly tell Charlie and Grandpa Joe about how Charlie would be inheriting the entire factory, to the latter's initial disbelief. And then they'd go back to Charlie's house and escort the rest of his family back to the factory. And then, the book would end with all of them triumphantly riding in the sky. But in the 2005 movie, because this movie is a perfect example of we can't have nice things, we don't get any of this. They skip the 2005 Wonka asking where Charlie lives. Kinda sus if you ask me. We get some little moment with the family that obviously was not in the book, and then the glass elevator crashes into the house, but there isn't a lot of commotion coming from the grandparents, it's mostly from the normal parents. Everyone gets acquainted, and Charlie introduces Wonka to the family, and Mr. Wonka responds by having another conniption. And now we get the big bombshell. Wonka is giving Charlie his whole entire factory. And instead of the reason being, oh, Book Wonka knows he's old, for 2005 Wonka, it's that he saw a single gray hair in his stupid bob cut while getting his annual haircut. Also, considering how young he looks, that's... yeah, I don't believe it. He sent out the golden tickets to find an heir to his throne, but instead of the winner being his most favorite child, 2005 Wonka states that the winner was the least rotten. Once again, a subtle but important difference. And now we get to a massive slap in the face moment. Wonka asks Charlie if he'll leave his old life behind to learn the ropes at the factory. Charlie says yes, as long as his family can join. And right when you think 2005 Wonka is going to be decent for once, he fakes everyone out and says no. Like, he says it in such a way that at first you think he's going to say yes, but he's all like, of course they can't! I am wow. Just wow. He says that you can't run a chocolate factory with a family hanging over you like a dead goose. But oh no, it's okay. He says no offense to Grandpa George, who rightfully calls him a jerk. Mr. Wonka goes on this dumb spiel about how a chocolatier should fly solo no matter the consequences. And about how he straight up lies about him not having a family, like the Book Wonka wannabe he is. Oh, and he calls Charlie never being able to see his family again an added bonus. Okay, I'm going to be as nice and understanding as I can with this. I know what everyone is thinking. Oh, he doesn't know any better, he's scared because of his trauma. That I will agree with. But 2005 Wonka has been such an unlikable bag of crocodile trash to the point where it seriously makes me ask, why should I care? Why should I be sympathizing with this character? What, just so I can see all the karma that's going to be dumped onto him later? Now I know another thing that's going to be said. He has the capacity for change. Yes, I will agree with that. But he seriously needs to stop focusing on himself and he needs to start focusing on why he is the way he is. He needs to ponder his actions, see why he is in the wrong, and try to tackle the problem head on. Facing your fears is the one big catalyst for change and healing your mental wounds. If you don't tackle the problem head on and learn to start healing, crap like what's happening now in the movie is going to occur. And if you pull scumbag stunts like this, all because of your trauma and your lack of focusing on your need to heal, the universe is going to take a massive dump on you, which is exactly what happens with this film. Oh yes, this film actually does something right for once, because after this moment, 2005 Wonka does actually get some well-deserved karma. Upon hearing all of this, Charlie Bucket says no. Mr. Wonka tries his darndest to swindle him, but Charlie still says no. He values his family more than some dumb candy. Charlie, you have my utmost respect. You saying no to this man is exactly what needs to happen in this situation. And after each and every single stunt, I've seen this morally disgusting Candyman pull. It is one of the most cathartic things I have seen in a hot minute. Oh, and you all know what Mr. Wonka's response to all of this is? He says it's unexpected and weird in the most shocked and surprised way possible, like he thinks Charlie's response is incorrect or something. You're one to talk, you why-I-oughta. Mr. Wonka goes into the glass elevator, tries one final time to change Charlie's mind. Charlie once again says no. And Mr. Wonka flies away all butthurt just because a child said no to some dumb biased proposition that was based solely off of trauma. Wow, movie. For once you actually did the whole karma thing right. You finally realized how much of an unlikable little Nimrod 2005 Wonka is, and right when his behavior was at its absolute worst, you finally had enough and said no. When 2005 Wonka pulled his worst stunt yet, you said, no, box your stuff. Out the front door, parking lot, car, goodbye. Bravo! Grandma Georgina, the crazy one, says that things are only going to get better from here, and she's actually right. The next morning, the family, including Grandpa Joe, all helped to fix the collateral damage from yesterday, and Mr. Bucket gets a job fixing the robot toothpaste arm that once replaced him, and because of that, we're able to see that the family now has enough money to put decent meals on the table. However, while things were going up for the Bucket family, things were going down for Mr. Wonka. Apparently, his candy sales have plummeted thanks to his lower mood. We see him having a therapy session with an Oompa Loompa, and what they're discussing is why his candies are terrible. It's because he feels terrible. And that's all. There is none of them discussing Wonka's trauma, none of that. But here's the thing. Had you been discussing that, you would have, number one, acknowledged the trauma and the fact that what you ran through was bad, which is instrumental in healing, mind you. Number two, acknowledged why you're in the wrong as well as your father. And number three, discussed the previous 2 points so that you'd feel more comfortable trying to actually tackle the problem. Thankfully, someone does come to save Mr. Wonka. Good old Charlie Bucket. Next scene, we see that Charlie apparently has a job as a shoe shiner by a cafe. Alright then. Mr. Wonka is secretly reading a newspaper, and he says this when Charlie says his candies aren't selling too good. And I quote, I suppose maybe he's just a rotten egg who deserves it. Even Charlie says that Wonka isn't all he's cracked up to be. Oh my gosh. Guys, do you see what I see? Growth. 2005 Wonka's finally starting to grow. He finally acknowledges that he's also been in the wrong. Ooh, baby, he's finally down the path to becoming a decent human being. Now all that needs to happen is 2005 Wonka actually confronting his trauma, and we're all set. Charlie asks why 2005 Wonka is so against the idea of family, and while 2005 Wonka does sort of dodge the question at first, it isn't anywhere near as mean or obnoxious as before. And when Charlie speaks the truth about families doing what they do out of love, Wonka almost seems broken at this statement, in denial because of how bad his dad was. Charlie proposes the idea of Mr. Wonka finally confronting his dad. Mr. Wonka opposes of the idea at first, but decides to go when Charlie suggests coming with him. And Mr. Wonka actually seems to be enthusiastic about it. Charlie is giving him that push he really needs to confront his emotional wounds. Also, I like how Mr. Wonka casually parks the glass elevator in the sidewalk. Why is that funny? The glass elevator transports them to the little building where Wonka's dad has been all these years. At least to the snowbound land where his dad magically relocated. After a bunch of build-up, we finally see Wilbur Wonka in the flesh. He sets Mr. Wonka down for a dental check, and through Charlie's point of view, we see a bunch of newspaper clippings chronicling Wonka's success. Wilbur checks Wonka's teeth, and then the realization hits him. It's his son, the successful entrepreneur that he so callously abandoned when he was a child, pearly whites and all. The two make up with a simple side hug and a tear or two. Okay, yeah, sure. These two have had an estranged relationship for so many years. Wonka ran away without a second word or thought because of his dad. And even after all this time, after all that abuse, all we get is just some glorified hug and a few tears, instead of seeing them actually doing something like catching up or actually talking to each other. I get that misrepresentation of deep and serious stuff like this is common in movies, but the fact that it's coming from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory just makes it 1,000 times more insulting. We then see that Mr. Wonka actually allowed Charlie's deal of having his family live with him in the factory. Everyone is seen sitting down in their little hut eating a hearty supper, and Mr. Wonka joins them. And through miracle of miracles, we see 2005 Wonka actually being a good human being. When Grandma Georgina compliments him, he actually compliments her back in a way that feels genuine and not like callous sarcasm, and he graciously accepts a hug from her. And also, he's politely and properly having an open discussion with Charlie about a new style of candy they're trying to make. And when Mrs. Bucket warns them, no business talk at the dinner table, all Wonka does is happily agree with Charlie's ideas. We then pan out of the house, seeing that it's been transported to the chocolate room, with buckets of fake snow raining down upon them to emulate what their environment was like back at home. We close on the narrator saying that life has never been sweeter. Charlie was able to make it on top in the end. Mr. Wonka was finally able to heal his emotional wounds and have the real loving family he so desperately needed. It's a genuinely nice and heartwarming ending that tugs at your heartstrings. It's able to peacefully resolve the conflicts, and it nicely wraps everything up to a close. It almost makes you want to forgive and forget every single one of the thousands of insulting and terrible things that this film threw at you. And that was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory's 2005 adaptation. The absolute worst thing to have ever spawned from the Willy Wonka franchise. And man, do I have quite a lot of negative things to say about this dumpster fire. However, let's actually start with the positives first. I hate this movie. I won't deny that, but I'm sure you guys are probably wondering, Joseph, you're normally a very positive person and you absolutely adore Willy Wonka. There has to be something from this giant fiasco that you enjoyed. Well, you're right actually. First and foremost, my most favorite parts about this movie, the scenes with the boat ride and the great glass elevator. They are genuinely the two scenes that are able to almost perfectly capture the essence and emotions that you got from those 2 points in the book. Excitement from the boat ride and awe and wonder from the glass elevator tour. They were able to recapture those in the 2005 movie. This film barely has any scenes like that, so I think it's important to recognize them. As for the soundtrack, I actually do like a lot of the instrumental background music tracks, and Mike's Oompa Loompa song also slaps pretty hard, I will admit. Did I have any positives with 2005 Wonka? I did. Despite how absolutely unnecessary and stupid the whole backstory bullcrap was, it was pretty nice seeing 2005 Wonka actually developing into a decent human being. I also loved the chemistry he started to share with Charlie being the one driving force that Wonka needed in order to confront his trauma. Sure, it does absolutely nothing in redeeming all the crap he did beforehand, but again, it is kind of nice to see him actually see how he was in the wrong and see the beginning of his healing process. The parts where 2005 Wonka was being mean to the adults were actually pretty funny. As I explained earlier, it works because number one, he's lashing out at the direct cause of his problems instead of the children who really don't deserve it. And number two, the parents are the cause of the children's bratty behavior, so it's more cathartic. The only real positive thing I can say about his design, I like the rainbow candies in his cane. It's a nice addition. Genuinely the one thing about this design that actually fits the character. And another thing, I absolutely love the two scenes where Wonka bumps into the glass elevator. That right there is perfection. Easily one of the funniest parts of the whole entire movie. Again, it's like they know about 2005 Wonka being morally disgusting, and they threw that in there for a bit of cathartic slapstick. Had the film had more moments like this, I feel like 2005 Wonka being a jerk would have been a bit more tolerable. I also like the cool white aesthetic of this version's Wonka Vision Room, and the sleek rocket design of the glass Wonkavator. I think they're neat. Okay, so that's it for positives. Let's go to one of the biggest main talking points of this video. How does this film fare as an adaptation? How does the 2005 film fare as an adaptation to the original book? I will admit, it's actually surprisingly not horrible. Compared to the 1971 film, a lot more things from the book return here, like the Wonkatania being exactly like described in the book, the squirrel room, Charlie Bucket's dad being an actual character, the great glass elevator being made out of glass, and a lot of lines are repeated verbatim with only minor changes. While it does mean that it's a better adaptation than the 1971 film, that doesn't mean it's perfect. Certain events, from small things like the way dialogue is arranged to larger things, are either structured completely backwards or completely wrong compared to the book, like with the Oompa Loompa songs occurring either before or after where they were supposed to be in the book. And the songs themselves, the lyrics are jumbled around, and instead of all of them being tribal chants with drum beats, all of them sound like modern pop songs, which if you ask me, is stupid. There are also all of the really little things that I mentioned while comparing the film and the book. However, these are small and don't really sour the experience. The small changes in dialogue and rearrangements to small plot events and elements don't really matter. They're minuscule and you're only really going to notice them if you're like me and are actively watching this film and reading the book at the same time. They're small and inoffensive. But then you get to the areas where the deviations do become offensive, largely with Tim Burton's aesthetic and how it screws this film over, and the simply vile changes they made to Book Wonka. Let's look at the both of them. You wanna know one thing I absolutely love about the book? It has this really rustic, comforting vibe and aesthetic. There isn't any sort of modern technology, and any technology that is mentioned is largely considered timeless, like television. A lot of illustrations for the book use a lot of bright and warm colors, and machinery isn't really portrayed as modern or futuristic. It's more rustic and vintage. And machinery usually has colorful parts, like with the gum machine's many colorful pipes and liquid. I mean, this book was published in 1960s Great Britain. Things were far more simple back then, so it was kind of a requirement for things in this story to be simple and vintage. It's a vibe and aesthetic that's very comforting, and I feel like it's really helped with this book gathering an audience. Do you want to know the exact opposite to all of this? The 2005 film. Seriously, this film is the exact opposite of everything that the book's original aesthetic established. Instead of being soft and warm and comforting and vintage, this film is dark and brooding and futuristic. This is nothing like in the book. It completely nullifies the comforting vibes, which mind you was one of the book's biggest positives. I've said it before, but I seriously need to say it again because it is true to a T. Tim Burton's aesthetic screwed this movie over to the moon and back. It completely takes away from the warm and rustic feel of the original book. When it comes to areas outside of the factory, it's not that problematic, but then you get to the areas inside the factory and it's really where the new aesthetic starts to become problematic. Like with the chocolate room. The book version of the chocolate room was bright, happy, colorful, whimsical. It looked like every child's dream. The 2005 version looks like it was pulled out of a child's nightmare. Like, look at this. I mean, honestly, how? It's too dark, there's too little color, the plants either look like nerve cells or coral. This is not what the chocolate room is supposed to be. And other things from the 2005 film also do the exact same thing. But with the chocolate room and inventing room, it's especially obvious. I already had my turn ranting about the 2005 version of the inventing room, so I'm just gonna move on from that. The nut room honestly looks a bit too futuristic for its own good. It's all clean and smooth. And what is probably the biggest thing that irks me about this? Quite a few other adaptations were at least able to understand this. Even the 1971 film understood this. Like, for as poor of an adaptation the 1971 film is, I will give them major credit. They absolutely nailed the rustic vintage vibe of the original book. The 2005 film, they threw all of that out of the window completely the very second Tim Burton was hired onto the project. And yes, I know the original book could be dark, but it was more dark in its storytelling and implications, not with its overall aesthetic. However, the aesthetic isn't the worst thing that was changed. A dark version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory can work, but its execution is the most important thing. With this in mind, I'm sure you're asking, what is the absolute worst part about this movie? The worst part about this film is the fact that it gave birth to the 2005 version of Willy Wonka. Bet you didn't see that one coming, did you? My opinions on Willy Wonka tend to hold some kind of funny irony. The 1971 film's big issue is that it's an adaptation. As a film, it's great. As an adaptation, it's just bleh. Now with this film, despite it being Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and the focus sort of recentering itself towards Charlie, my problems with this film actually stem from the 2005 version of Willy Wonka. This version of the character is the ultimate nightmare scenario. He is everything that could possibly go wrong with the Willy Wonka adaptation. But what did they do to this character? Well, buckle up, because what they did is the actual, literal worst. Johnny Depp, you're awesome. You're one of my favorite actors. You're an awesome human being. I love and respect you to bits, but this version of Wonka disgusts me. And there are three major versions as to why, starting with his absolutely abysmal design. Who is Willy Wonka supposed to be? He's this bright, happy, colorful old man who is teaching lessons on morality and personality traits to children. Now, I really want you to consider all of this, and then look at the 2005 version of Wonka. This design is absolutely abysmal. And even if you take away the context of this being a Book Wonka ripoff, it's still bad. This design is so bad, to the point where it's bad no matter what version of Willy Wonka it's trying to rip off. I genuinely don't even know where to start with this design because of how massively it fails in every conceivable area. Does this design look appropriate for Willy Wonka? Or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? Or any family-oriented piece of media for that matter? No, seriously, I want to know who thought this design would be even remotely appropriate. How did this get past like the censors and quality control everything? Like, did Warner Brothers and everyone working on this film have a massive brain fart? Like, I don't... If I had to start somewhere, it would be the color of his wardrobe. Yet another example of the Tim Burton aesthetic not working. The outfit is way too dark and it lacks color. It does not fit the colorful whimsy of the character. And the hair. Oh, my sweet mother of Neptune, the atrocious hair. I am not an expert on fashion in the slightest, and yet I think this hair is cringe and offensive. I legit want to call the fashion police and scream into the phone about how he has a bob cut. And yes, I know what Johnny Depp said about the bob cut. It was trying to be unflattering and cringe. But does that make it any better? No, of course it doesn't! And then you have the gross and disgusting latex gloves, which make me want to projectile vomit every time I have to acknowledge their existence. I know it's really stupid to throw a conniption over the gloves specifically, but like, dear mother of Poseidon, why? How did everyone think that this design, especially the gloves, were even remotely close to okay? Who thought that this design would be appealing to like 6 to 12-year-olds? Seriously, his younger self makes a better design than the creature he devolved into. Remember how Wonka was this wise, warm, comforting older figure to all the kids, and everything actually felt safe yet still adventurous around him? With 2005 Wonka, there is no comfort or safety. You take one step and you're killed or dead. But you know what? While this is genuinely the biggest problem for 2005 Wonka by himself, it's only a third as to why 2005 Wonka sucks. Because now we get into the second problem, his horrible personality. I understand that Book Wonka had a tendency to be crass and a bit of a prankster. But one thing that this movie fails to understand is that there is a difference between being haha sarcasm funny and being a jerk. An unpleasant, unsympathetic, careless jerk. Book Wonka was like this kind, caring older father figure. He knew everything in the factory like the back of his hand. And he knew that no matter what happened to the children, they would be alive and mostly well. He would often freak out whenever the children did start to misbehave, and he tried to reassure the parents whenever it did start happening. He genuinely felt like he cared about his patrons. He was punishing these kids not for a quick and cheap shot at catharsis, but it felt like he was punishing them out of tough love. He wanted to see these children learn their lessons so that they could grow up to be more productive members of society. He was very positive with things no matter what wild, crazy, and unpredictable things happened in the factory. Sure, he had a bit of crassness and he could be a little bit apathetic, but when those moments do show up, they don't really feel offensive. They feel like him just trying to be funny and lighten the mood. Do you want to know how you ruin a character like this? Or any character for that matter? Take those negative traits and put them to the forefront. I mean, for real, take the few instances where Book Wonka is being a jerk and magnify them to the 1000th degree. That's 2005 Wonka, and oh dear Neptune, it sucks and it gets old very quick. Like, what happened to Mr. Wonka being this kind, caring old man who was dishing out these punishments and not stopping them only because he wanted to teach the kids something? At least with Book Wonka, it felt justified because there was that sense of care. With 2005 Wonka, I can only assume he's doing it because he wants a cheap shot at feeling some kind of dumb sense of catharsis. 2005 Wonka does not care about these children. At all. Not even when he actively sees them going through some kind of trauma thanks to the parents not keeping them in check. This completely nullifies the warm-heartedness of the character, and so MG, I hate it! Here's another thing that gets on my nerves, how unenthusiastic 2005 Wonka is. Book Wonka was always skipping everywhere, and he often got super giddy when he was showing everyone his inventions. It felt like a child happily showcasing to everyone something that he made that he was proud of. He wanted to share that sense of happiness with the rest of his patrons. It's something that helped to make Book Wonka an enjoyable character, and it helped with forming the book's whimsical charm. How does 2005 Wonka react to everything? He just says, oh yeah, this exists, and does things. There is barely any sense of heart or soul. He doesn't get all excited when he shows everyone the chocolate river or the SS Wonkatania, and he isn't at a literal loss for words when describing the meal gum. 90% of the time, it feels like 2005 Wonka is showcasing his factory largely for bragging rights and nothing more. They completely suck the life out of Book Wonka, and it's just painful to have to experience. But do you want to know what really makes 2005 Wonka's attitude problem especially painful? His stupid and unnecessary backstory. And here we are. What is genuinely the hardest thing for me to tackle about this review thanks to how touchy and serious the subject matter is. They gave 2005 Wonka a tragic backstory about his dad being this abusive butt-nugget dentist. First and foremost, not a single ounce of this was in the book. Book Wonka said himself he had no family at all. So by doing this, you're shoving out your status as an effective adaptation. However, the fact that this wasn't in the book is the least of its problems. Now, why was this even added? Tim Burton wanted to sort of vent out his own problems about his own family and estranged parents, and he wanted to give out a positive message on family. And I can 110% respect that. Things like estranged family and abuse are things that we as humans should be less afraid to talk about. But let's take the whole 2005 Wonka's backstory thing for what it is at face value. You have this character, Willy Wonka, and you add this backstory about his father being a butt. Willy Wonka. This character who is supposed to be this happy, wise old man, you turn him into a massive edgelord and put this backstory onto him like, oh, dude, this feels like something you'd only see in tactless fanfiction. First, my primary issue with this, you're putting something this serious and touchy like this in a silly story meant for 6 to 12-year-olds. I get that you want to spread a message and everything, and I can respect that, but bruh, why are you doing this with this silly morality tale? If you want to discuss stuff like this, then just do it. Do not muddle your message by putting it in an already existing property like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. If you do want to make some overarching story with this being the main message, make something original instead of pulling tacky crap like this. And even then, I take issue with the fact that you have it centered around Willy Wonka, of all characters. Like, if you did this with one of the rotten children, that would be more understandable, but you did this with Willy Wonka. You know, this character. This happy, playful old man who was seen in commercials talking about his dumb, googly-eyed sentient candies while driving around in a flying car. You want to turn this character into a walking PSA for the severity and negative effects of child abuse. Really, do I need to explain how stupid this sounds? You want to know another thing I find really dumb? Just how quickly 2005 Wonka and his dad make up. They just sort of go, oh yeah, I forgive you, sorry, with just a hug and a few tears. Again, this goes by way too quickly for me to buy it. They just hug and make up despite the heavy burdens they've been putting on each other for so many years. If you really want to show that 2005 Wonka and his dad made up, have his dad at the little dinner at the end. Have them converse with Charlie about candy. Heck, you could have his dad chime in about a candy that could be helpful with oral health. I vaguely remember seeing at Walmart in the oral care section they had like these weird lollipops and floss that were actually able to help cleaning your teeth. You could have Wonka's dad suggest something like this and Wonka would be 100% into it. They'd be having this conversation, they'd be running with each other, they'd be at peace with each other, and the message of them having made up would have been delivered much more efficiently. Also another thing, the fact that you have him being a jerk towards these children and not even caring up until the last minute makes it very hard for me to feel for this man. Had 2005 Wonka's attitude problem been completely mute, he could be seen as a very effective target for sympathy. He was this poor boy with a cumbersome father who didn't want his son following his dreams, straight up abandoning him when Wonka did decide to follow his dreams. And I could feel myself feeling lots of empathy for 2005 Wonka had you not decided to make this man for the 1000th time an unsympathetic jerk. And yes, again, I know that he's mad at the world and everything, but if you want to have him being mean, have it directed at the adults. An adult is not only the one responsible for his trauma, adults are the ones responsible for the 4 kids' unruly behavior. This movie may be a message about family and stuff, but I honestly see it as a more cautionary tale. This is a perfect example of what can go wrong if you refuse to get help for your childhood trauma and abuse, and why it's so important to seek help. If you have unresolved childhood trauma that has been caused by abuse, the most important thing you can do is try and heal from it. If you grow up with this skewed idea of how you work with the rest of the world, like with 2005 Wonka, it's going to lead to you making bad decisions, also like 2005 Wonka. I don't want that to happen to anyone. No one deserves that. If you have unresolved problems with trauma and emotional wounds, the best thing to do is to speak to someone about it. Speak to someone you trust. The road is long and tough, but it's possible and it can be done. I have faith in you. You're going to do great. Sure, there will be slip-ups every now and again, but it's part of being human. You can do this. Now, with that out of the way, I've ranted and raved about what this movie is. A tactless and inefficient adaptation of a great book. However, now I want to tackle what could have been. What could have been done with this movie that would have made it turn out better? This is a question that legit haunts me sometimes. What would the world of Wonka be like had this movie not been so terrible? Had there been a push? Had anything been done different? How would Wonka be faring now? Had the film had a different director? Or had the Roald Dahl Estate put their foot down to some of the bullcrap moves that Tim Burton was pulling? Could this movie had turned out at least okay? As it turns out, we do actually have a glance at what 2005 Wonka could have been. Apparently there's this leaked script from 2001. I've read through chunks of it and I will admit it's actually pretty decent. As an adaptation per se, it's good. Dare I say better than the final piece of crap we actually got. Wonka in this version is more like Book Wonka, but he's more of an unpredictable prankster, and he's a bit more crass, but nowhere near as bad as 2005 Wonka. And in the factory they have some pretty neat extra things, like a candy museum theater hybrid. Wonka's design here is ambiguous. All we do know is that he has a dark purple cone, and apparently he wears kimono pajamas. Had the 2005 film actually used the screenplay, I feel like it would have been a far better movie, and dare I say it would have been a far more positive influence on the franchise. This 2001 Wonka doesn't feel like a giant jerk, and there is no stupid backstory bullcrap either from what I've read of the script. But now we get to Tim Burton's version. Could this film had been good with Tim Burton directing it? Dare I say, 100% yes, it could have. I feel like the reason why a lot of the stupid changes were made was because the Roald Dahl Estate was being way too accepting of them. And even then, with the stuff they did feel dubious about, they still said yes! Like with the Wonka backstory bullcrap, the Roald Dahl Estate was actually hesitant about it at first, but they still said yes. I feel like, had the Dahl Estate put their foot down and said no to some of the outlandish and stupid things Burton wanted to change, this movie could have turned out to be at least tolerable. They really should have said no to this man instead of looking at these changes and going, "The bird is the word!" That right there is a pretty good summary of what this film's decision-making process was like from May 2003 onwards. Now, what I'm about to say is going to be incredibly stupid, but hear me out. With a bit of tweaking, 2005 Wonka's design can actually work. I know I sound absolutely insane, but I want to show you guys proof. Ladies and gentlemen, meet the French version of Broadway Wonka. French Broadway Wonka is literally just 2005 Wonka, but they modified his design and made it work. And why this is so significant? 2005 Wonka's design is so horrendously, sickeningly bad, to the point where I never did I ever think that any other version of this design could work. But French Broadway Wonka proves the impossible. They made him more colorful. They got the color of his pants right. His hair doesn't feel obnoxious. It's like they knew all the problems with 2005 Wonka's design and they fixed them and made them work. Had this been 2005 Wonka's design, the entire character would have felt a lot more tolerable. Even Opera Wonka had a better design, and it's literally 2005 Wonka with a color palette swap. Yes, they once had a Willy Wonka opera, and their version of Wonka also proves that 2005 Wonka's design seriously should have been changed, even just a little bit. Again, I'm not disrespecting Johnny Depp. I still think he's an awesome dude, but there really should have been more input with his Wonka design. And again, the Dahl Estate should have said no to the stupid backstory. I mean, they themselves were feeling apprehensive about it. This film would have been a much better adaptation had all of that been taken out of the equation completely. I also don't like the reason for applying this to Wonka specifically. Tim Burton said that it makes Wonka more than just some weird guy. Okay, so do I need to explain how flawed this logic is? Willy Wonka's whole entire shtick is that he's like this weird, unexplainable magic demigod demon person. By trying to come up with an explanation to his madness, you are sucking the fun out of the character. Oh, and here's something really funny. You guys are gonna get a real kick out of this. One of the reasons they wanted to keep Charlie's dad in there is because Tim Burton thought that 2005 Wonka would be a really bad father figure to Charlie. That is, I am speechless. I am genuinely speechless. Like, this film is so freaking ridiculous. But you know what? Maybe had they recognized all of this, they could have used it to their advantage. Hear me out. Everything with this film could have been kept in had they treated it as a parody of Willy Wonka. Like, making jokes about how stupid and ridiculous Tim Burton's version is. Have Willy Wonka be like he was in this film and have all the other characters react in according yet over-exaggerated ways. Had you made fun of and pointed out all of the flaws with the incredibly stupid charred baked bean changes they made, and had fun making fun of just how stupid all of it is, this movie would have been amazing. Honestly, had you not even hired Tim Burton to begin with, this film would have been inevitably 1,000 times better. Had this film been at least decent, with a version of Wonka that fit the warm-hearted image of Book Wonka, it would have been a much better influence on the franchise going forward. Which brings me to what is arguably the worst part about this film, its impact on the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory franchise. The worst part about the 2005 film is its negative impact on the Wonka franchise. Willy Wonka was doing amazing ever since the 1971 film launched. The candy company helped keep the man with a wide audience, and the original book would have become a favorite with many. However, then the 2005 film released. And then 2005 Wonka went, "Oh, I know, let's euthanize this entire franchise with Jerktonium." 2005 Wonka fever was running rampant back then, destroying every part of the franchise as multiple versions of Wonka became afterthoughts and lost to media left and right. First, let's address how 2005 Wonka's popularity jeopardized the mere existence of literally every single other version of the character that came before. 1971 Wonka is at constant feuds with 2005 Wonka, with heavy discourse as to who's superior. 2005 Wonka was supposed to emulate Book Wonka, but as I've established, this adaptation completely destroyed Book Wonka, and then farted on his grave. However, the absolute worst example of all of this is with the Wonka candy mascot they were using before this time. The company was doing very well during this time period. However, after the 2005 film released, the company practically imploded on itself. During the 2005 film's heyday, what I like to call the candy company's burnout era, they largely stopped using a mascot for a while. Instead, they used the 2005 film characters for their advertising. Because that's smart, use the ugly munchkins instead of the mascot that was gaining you big bucks. No longer was there this webcore-themed happy old dude in lime green trousers. They largely stopped using that mascot. And the mascot and overall Wonka brand they used in the UK straight up died for like 8 years. During the burnout era, they made some flash games that only really existed to either promote the 2005 film, contests that were related to the 2005 film, or candies that had used the 2005 film to promote them. Remember Wonka donuts? These were these little chocolate candy donuts covered in sprinkles. Almost all of the advertising done for them had 2005 Wonka literally plastered all over it because of the fact that the donuts candies released just a short while after the 2005 film's release. There was like this candy garden commercial where they straight up used footage from the 2005 film. They treated 2005 Wonka as a sort of mascot. And I don't know about you, but that, kinda disgusts me, actually. They also had a golden ticket contest to promote the film. All of the prizes related to the 2005 film in some way. Oh, and most of the Burnout era games kinda sucked. The Donuts game especially. Think about a horrible version of Kirby's Dream Buffet, and that's basically what you get with the Donuts Racer game. After 2005, and in 2006 specifically, the company would enter its modern era with this new, sleeker mascot. Okay, to give modern Nestle Wonka credit, there is actually quite a bit of cool stuff to his name. Like this Wonka Day of the Dead Sweet Tarts art contest thing, this physical arcade machine they made called Wonka Sweetland. The flash games they made back then were decent at best, mildly boring at worst. Despite this, however, the modern era is nowhere near as amazing as every piece of information and every memento that came from the classic era. There's the mascot, which feels like a real downgrade compared to the design we had previously. This is legit one of the worst Wonka designs, period. It is on the more tolerable end of bad, but still, it's bad. They tried to fix something that wasn't broke, and it backfired. This design isn't terrible, it's just below average, but I do have multiple glaring issues with it. And what doesn't help is that some of the advertising they did back during the late 2000s was abysmal. Some of the worst advertising that I have ever seen. You guys want to know exactly what they did? You don't? Well, too bad, we're looking at it anyway. There's the Wonked Out Room ads, which they made to promote a digital room contest. I mentioned them in the beginning of the video. Really cringe music video ads that might have been okay back then, but now would be met with widespread hate and scorn thanks to how desperately pandering they are. What I did not mention in the beginning was the Laffy Taffy humor crisis. The company made this absolutely huge deal about what may or may not have been a fake claim about a Laffy Taffy joke being unfunny. Yup. As part of this absolutely stupid marketing stunt, they held job openings for kids to submit and review jokes on the Wonka.com website. Rather bad idea, guys. They also made some promo videos for these as well, including 9 entire minutes of this boring old dude speaking up on a podium about the unfunny joke and all of the stops they're pulling in order to make sure the pure and perfect world of Wonka remains milk coming out of your nose funny. I understand the concept of why this is supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be ironic and over-exaggerating everything, but the way it was executed just makes it fall flat. Later, starting in either late 2008 or early 2009, starting what I like to call the company's postmodern era, they would rebrand again, going for a soulless and unbranded great value aesthetic, with no mascot in sight. This rebrand was the moment all heart and soul completely faded from the company. There was no silly mascot, no awesome mechanical factory, no sweet bits of lore about Wonka himself liking air hockey or knowing all sorts of fun trivia. All of it was gone. And from what I can recall, they actually pulled inspiration from the 2005 film for their advertising. Granted, the postmodern Wonka aesthetic, smooth wavy purple and fancy gold outlines with a bit of pastel machinery thrown in, it all actually looks really nice. But the entire company's aesthetic was oversimplified. Yes, Wonka did the whole oversimplification trend an entire decade before everyone else hopped onto the bandwagon. I would give the company points for this, but then you remember that Wonka is a brand known for its uniqueness and wackiness. Seriously, people, there was absolutely no valid excuse for all this. This never should have happened. Did they make postmodern candies? Yes, they did. You have kazoozles, which were like these weird ropes filled with a chewy filling. You don't hear much about these due to them not lasting very long, and in fact, when Wonka Company died, I think they sort of rebranded them to Sweethearts Ropes. They had Wonka Exceptionals, which were supposed to be this real fancy and decadent take on the average Wonka bar. They had Wonka Randoms, which were literally just gummies assorted into random shapes. Really sounds like something that any company would do, and not something original and seemingly logic-defying or super identifiable like most other Wonka candies. What about Wonka.com during the postmodern era? They completely got rid of all the games and nearly every other portion of the website. They had one game, I repeat, one game, and it was this absolutely facepalm-worthy painting simulator. The thing didn't even have black and white as color options. Sure, they did do some cool stuff with the company during the postmodern era, like holding a couple of rock band tours and opening a Wonka product shop in the Toys R Us Times Square location. They used to have like vending machines with Wonka products in them, and they have an old Blogspot blog that acts as a neat archive for some late 2000s and early 2010s nostalgia. But aside from these couple of things, the Wonka brand had lost all of the magic that made it once so fun and memorable. In fact, this problem had become so bad to the point where in 2015, they had to shut down the Wonka name completely and rebrand it to the Nestle Candy Shop in one final desperate act to maintain relevance and keep some kind of sales flow going. Needless to say, this made quite a lot of people miffed, and rightfully so. You have this unique and aesthetically pleasing brand, which genuinely has one of the most brilliant concepts you could do for a media and tie-in brand. And yet, you throw all of that away just because you want some of that sweet recognition and moolah. This was dumb and stupid and counterintuitive and insulting, and I am genuinely baffled as to how Nestle thought any of this was a good idea. By 2018, Wonka's real-life empire had collapsed completely, and Nestle sold all of the surviving then Wonka candies to the Ferrero brand. Oh, and the website? When you try to enter Wonka.com as your URL now, it redirects you to the Ferrero corporate website. Also, speaking of the UK advertising from earlier, almost everything from the UK brand has been lost to time. The terrifying UK mascot was basically thrown right into the trash heap the second 2005 Wonka came into the picture. Gone was the totally tubular yet terrifying early CGI visuals done by Passion Pictures and Ruse and Partners. Gone was the cool flashy website made by Pilot Interactive, and the games they had from the UK website were almost completely wiped from existence. Oh, and guess what they did with the website when 2005 Wonka came into the picture? No, really, yes. They used it to advertise the 2005 film and some contests where you could find codes to get a CD copy of the 2005 film's game. Biggest scam of the century. Every single thing from the UK website that was there previously was wiped, including the Flash games. You cannot play the UK website games. They're gone forever, and the only remnants of them are old data files on the Wayback Machine. A large part of why the UK games are lost has to do with crazy Shockwave Flash mumbo-jumbo that I won't get into here, but after 2006, the brand in the UK was dead, and it remained that way up until a short while in 2013 when the UK had new Wonka bars. These bars did not last long thanks to how atrociously unhealthy they were. You all know what else is lost from UK Wonka? Most of his website, multiple commercials for both candies and promotions and sweepstakes, tons of advertising material, and even some of the candy and chocolate bars. Lost media is actually a big problem for the entire Wonka brand and not just with its UK advertising. First and foremost, Wonka was and still is a really niche brand, and not all parts of it were met with widespread praise. The height of the company took place during the late 90s and early 2000s, a time where preservation of digital media for nostalgic/posterity purposes wasn't anywhere near as prevalent as it is now. That and technology back then was primitive, and it was nowhere near as easy to archive digital media back then. Huge entire acres of the old Wonka.com website are lost to time. Had they had a chance to really stretch their legs and find a place on the website, then more content would have been able to be archived from them for future generations to enjoy. But sadly, the 2005 film's existence meant that they didn't get enough time. Both Wonka.com and Wonka.co.uk were thriving during their prime, to the point where the UK website specifically has straight up won actual awards. However, especially for Wonka.co.uk, they were only up for around 5 years, and this accounts for the whole website. Smaller parts of the website were only live for much smaller amounts of time. However, 2005 soon arrived, and the WONKApocalypse devastated the franchise. As a whole, if 2005 Wonka isn't a direct catalyst for the candy company's slow and painful demise, then he certainly was a big contributing factor. Leading away from the candy company, now we get to another version of Wonka whose downfall may or may not have been because of 2005 Wonka and... oh boy. Meet Swedish Wonka, a version of the character that was used in Kalle och Chokladfabriken, a 1983 Swedish Charlie and the Chocolate Factory cartoon by Sveriges Television. This cartoon is the best adaptation of the novel, period. That's not even much of my own opinion either. In terms of adapting from the book, the Swedish cartoon remains unmatched. There are a ton of things from the cartoon that are perfectly adapted from the book. It is a genuinely awesome version of the novel. However, the very second the 2005 film, Swedish Wonka turned from obscure to pretty much non-existent. You don't hear about the 1983 Swedish cartoon at all, even in Sweden, because the stupid 2005 film stole all of its thunder. The Swedish cartoon, such an awesome adaptation of the original novel it's supposed to be standing on, gets left behind in the dust to the point where it literally becomes lost media, all while the tactless and insulting 2005 film gets to bathe in all the glory. I get that Swedish Wonka has an unfair advantage over 2005 Wonka concerning how multiple people working on the Swedish cartoon had actual experience in children's literature, but still. Did the Swedish cartoon have any of this disrespectful, child-hating, abuse backstory bullcrap? No, it did not. Oh, and another thing I want to talk about. This cartoon is a PowerPoint slideshow. It is literally a glorified, narrated PowerPoint slideshow made in the 80s. And yet somehow it manages to be a far better adaptation and a far better movie in general than some multi-million blockbuster made 20 years later. That is just sad. But enough about Wonkas that came before. What about the ones that came after? All of them just feel disappointing at worst and only decent at best, with very little margin of error. First, let's get the big boy out of the way. The Broadway musical. It's alright. To be totally honest with you, it's genuinely the most mediocre thing I've seen from this franchise since like the Tom and Jerry crossover. It doesn't help that as a whole, Broadway musicals had never been my thing that interested me, but then I tried to keep my erratic self still for 2 hours to watch the musical on YouTube and, dude, it is mediocre as sin. There are a lot of genuinely funny lines and little moments thrown about, and I do think that quite a few of the songs are actually pretty good, but the set design is minimalistic and there are a bunch of stupid, cringeworthy baked beans moments, like with Violet straight up being a rising YouTube celebrity and a pop music queen, Mike TV being a hip computer nerd's Hacks McGee, and the suspicious amount of self-aware humor. No to all of that! However, the part where it becomes genuinely painful is with Broadway Wonka. I don't think Broadway Wonka is the actual literal worst, but he's not that great. I actually really love his design, and I enjoyed some of the extra things they did with him in his factory, but dude, you thought 2005 Wonka's attitude problem was bad? Wait till I tell you about Broadway Wonka. And yes, I do think that the 2005 film did negatively impact this musical. First of all, you have the bit with Grandpa Joe having worked for Wonka in the past, but I feel like this issue is most apparent with Broadway Wonka. You can't tell me that Broadway Wonka's character isn't heavily inspired off of the unpleasant child-hating antics of 2005 Wonka. It feels like they sucked out all of 2005 Wonka's problems with his design and backstory, but they had no idea where to put all that excess negativity. So they just poured all of it into making his already abysmal personality problem worse, and then just sort of half-heartedly closed the lid and then sent Broadway Wonka out into the wild without a second thought. He goes out of his way to hate on the kids even more than 2005 Wonka. This issue is so bad, like, Violet straight up explodes, and Veruca gets torn limb from limb by the squirrels. And yet Broadway Wonka just turns a blind eye and makes silly remarks about it. This isn't just an issue that sours this version of Wonka. It sours the entire play. The message of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is supposed to be how unfavorable traits are going to get appropriately punished. Appropriately! The fact that Wonka, this supposed widest older figure that everyone is supposed to look up to, is uncaring to the fact that these kids are in clear pain and literally dying is... No, dude, no. This and the musical's whole emphasis on humor completely numbs the morals that the book set out to teach. Broadway Wonka would have been 100% great had it been not for 2005 Wonka's dumb influence. What about other versions of Wonka? Well, there's the modern era candy mascot, who feels like they sucked the soul completely out of the classic era mascot. He has some notoriety, but it just doesn't feel the same. There's Tom and Jerry Wonka, who thankfully has very little influence from 2005 Wonka aside from him having the same hair. There's Service Now Wonka, who is actually a great version of Wonka aside from his design. In the commercials, we see him genuinely caring about his business and child patrons. However, his design is literally just copy-pasted from 1971 Wonka, and oh my word, is it painful! The only area of the Wonka universe that was positively affected by 2005 Wonka was the books, because sales of the book actually skyrocketed during the 2005 film's heyday. But of course, there's a catch. Prints of this book during 2005 had 2005 Wonka and Charlie printed on the covers. Because why not? The 2005 film's mere existence has lingered with this franchise. Back before 2005, Wonka stood for positivity and corporate goodwill. He was a genuinely warm-hearted businessman who thought of the children. He didn't care about money or any of that soulish jazz. Sure, certain versions of Wonka weren't able to reach this mark even before 2005, like with 1971 Wonka and the Nestle UK mascot, and the franchise itself has always had problems, like with over-reliance on 1971 Wonka for everything. But even with this, Wonka was largely a symbol for goodwill and warm-heartedness. But then 2005 Wonka came along and soiled it! Wonka barely ever stands for goodwill and warm-heartedness anymore. Now it just seems like he's been reduced to an outlet for jokes that can do, oh, he hates the children because that's so darn funny. And all of this because of 2005 Wonka and his abysmal attitude, which did a lot more harm to the franchise than good. It damaged Wonka and his character, turning him into a hateful shell of who he once was during his golden years. It completely sucked the life out of his franchise. It led to many things that have spawned from the Wonka name being forgotten to the point of being lost forever, never being able to be enjoyed ever again. And after all that I've seen, it's just sad. And there is a reason as to why Wonka Candy Lost Media makes me so angry. I really want all of these things. The website, the candy bars, the flash games. I want all of them to be preserved so that future generations will not only be able to learn about the past, but that older folks will be able to revisit them for nostalgic purposes. Maybe going back to all this feels therapeutic to some. Maybe a kid doing research on Willy Wonka for a research project finds out about the candy company and wants to make that his focus. But doing so is so difficult. A lot of it does have to do with age and everything, but 2005 Wonka's impact is also an issue, especially with the UK brand. It would be nice to see what Wonka UK looked like during the early 2000s. It would be cool to see the process behind animating the commercials and everything. It would be awesome to know what more of the candies and chocolate bars were like back then, but no, we can't. During Wonka's golden years, he was an icon that garnered a lot of respect, and rightfully so. And with the Wonka Candy Company hitting its peak during the late 90s and early 2000s, the man was on top of the world. You saw him everywhere. His design during this time was awesome. It felt like he really cared about his factory and the children he was marketing to. But then 2005 rolled around and Wonka lost his magic. Ever since, versions of Wonka that have spawned aren't able to reach greatness. They don't have that sort of magical spark. The late 2000s candy mascot, Broadway Wonka, the one they used in a Roald Dahl coloring book, the one they used in the Service Now commercials, Tom and Jerry Wonka, all of them are either super bland or have one or two fatal flaws that keep them from reaching greatness. None of them are able to hit that mark, scratch that itch, or make it to the top of that mountain anymore. There are some positives. The Service Now commercials are really nice aside from Service Now Wonka being, again, a physical copy of 1971 Wonka. Wonka's World of Candy is a game that's decent. The Netflix cartoon, if it hasn't already been cancelled, sounds like it could be something good based off of some concept art that leaked a while back. Now we have the 2023 film. I actually am excited for the 2023 film. However, I'm still approaching it with caution considering how mid the entire franchise has been throughout the past 20 years. And all because of some dumb movie that feels like fan fiction. Because that's what the 2005 film is. It's lowbrow and tacky Willy Wonka Wattpad fan fiction, written by an edgelord 14-year-old. Ladies and gentlemen, the last darns I had left to give have officially left the building. TLDR, Willy Wonka's 2005 adaptation is nothing short of a cinematic disaster. What could have been a great adaptation and a positive influence turned sour to the point where it completely sucked the life out of the franchise. Johnny Depp is awesome. Freddie Highmore is a cool dude, but the direction they were given was just no good, very bad, and horrible, and it destroyed any chance this movie could have had of being great. I would say that Tim Burton turned this into fan fiction, but this is not fan fiction. This is for reals, and that's genuinely one of the biggest things that gets under my skin with this movie. Just how unironic and competent it is. It is nothing but freaking fan fiction! But this is also real. This is an actual legit big-scale Willy Wonka adaptation, and they went out of their way to make this as show-offy and big as they could. The budget for this film was literally $150 million. That is nearly $233 million today. They did so much advertising to really hammer home that this is the new Wonka, the new totally rad Wonka for all the hip kids of the mid-2000s. You know, the happy and whimsical dude from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, this silly and dreamlike morality tale for children. And yet, despite the fact that this film went against everything that the book had established, everyone working on this film ultimately said yes. They said yes to all of this. Even with the things they felt dubious about, they still approved. Everyone was at least okay with this. Everyone was on board with making these absolutely needless and despicable changes. To say this film is bad is the understatement of the millennium. To say I hate this film is the understatement of the century. To say that 2005 Wonka disgusts me is the understatement of the decade. I would say that this film is bottom of the barrel, but no, that label doesn't do it justice. It's not bottom of the barrel, it's bottom of the frickin' earth. Literally bedrock. Any and every single other version of Wonka and their respective universes and adaptations, every single one that I can think of, are above 2005 Wonka somehow. Even with Wonkas who also have terrible designs, who also have attitudes worse than the spoiled children themselves, who also have dumb or uninteresting lore. Even with the most stupid, eye-straining, brain-dead, ridiculous, cringeworthy, OMG, what are you doing versions of the character that I've ever come across. They would make better versions of Wonka than 2005 Wonka could ever dream of being. The 2005 film dissed the absolute tar out of this book. They turned the book into the audio-visual equivalent of bedrock. However, bedrock is also important. It allows you to stay in your world, and you'll never fall out of your world as long as it's around. I want this movie to be a warning as to everything that can go wrong with the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory adaptation. The worst aesthetic you could possibly choose, a version of Wonka that sucks eggs and blows leaves, some stupid lore that completely destroys established continuity, and a movie that completely and utterly destroyed this franchise. But, despite how abysmal this film is, I'm not letting one film destroy my time with this franchise. I love Charlie and the Chocolate Factory to bits, and you know what? I'm not letting some dumb subpar film ruin it. Every franchise has its duds. It's a given. I may hate this film, but I know there are a lot of people out there who actually like it. And I'm perfectly fine with that. More power to them. I myself just don't like it. Despite this, I still love this franchise. It's allowed me to finally pursue a fulfilling hobby. It's something interesting that I can invest my time into. Not only this, but I get to spread what I've learned with others. And I will admit, I've had flunders and blunders in my videos, but I'm more than willing to climb back up and do as great as I can. I have been blessed to have an audience as patient and optimistic as you guys. Thank you for being with me every step of the way. Here's to an entire year of me being a Willy Wonka fan, and hopefully many more. Yeah!